a lord without a kingdom. This is just the more I think about it, the more frustrating it gets. Rocky sat in his dimly lit room, his expression gloomy. It had been a month since he transmigrated into this world. At first, there was fear of the unknown, fear of waking up in a new body in a place he didn't recognize. Then came the confusion, the aimless wandering as he tried to understand his new reality. Eventually, he adapted. He learned the ways of this world, the customs, the rules of survival. But there was one thing he still couldn't accept: this body. The original owner of this body had also been named Rocky, a second-generation noble with a solid family background and a promising future. He wasn't a bad person, nor was he particularly exceptional. In fact, he had one fatal flaw: he was a pushover. And not just any pushover. This guy was so weak-willed that he had let someone steal a sky city right out of his hands. A sky city, a miraculous flying city suspended high above the ground. To understand the absurdity of Rocky's loss, one needed to delve into the world's history. This world was called Sanabo, the land blessed by the gods. It was a world of swords, magic, and advanced magical technology. But for a so-called blessed land, the gods had shown it nothing but cruelty. 100 years ago, demons invaded from a different dimension, claiming 2/3 of the continent in an instant. Every race on the surface faced total annihilation, until humans invented sky cities, floating metropolises that became their salvation. The era of sky civilization had begun. For a century, humanity expanded its dominion in the skies, thriving, waiting for the day they could reclaim the land below. What started as a single flying city became 10, then 100. Today, there were so many sky cities that no one could count them all. And Rocky? Rocky had been the lord of one such city. His father, once a noble of the Barren family, had broken away to build a new legacy. Through sheer effort, he had established a medium-sized sky city with a population of 30,000. But tragedy struck early. Rocky's mother passed away when he was a child. The grief consumed his father, who, once a proud and capable man, slowly faded away until he, too, died a year ago. With both parents gone, Rocky naturally inherited the Sky City. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. A young city lord with a bright future, leading a thriving metropolis. Then, disaster struck. Why am I so damn unlucky? Rocky sighed, rubbing his temples as he recalled the betrayal that had cost him everything. It all started 6 months ago, when members of the Barren family, his father's original noble house, suddenly reappeared in his life. They welcomed him back into the family with open arms, promising vast benefits, wealth, and status. At the time, Rocky hadn't seen any reason to refuse. The Barren family was one of the great houses, a force to be reckoned with. Returning to his noble roots seemed like a logical choice. Except it was all a scam. As soon as he rejoined, the Barren family declared that all of his assets, his city, his wealth, everything, now belonged to them. And just like that, Rocky was stripped of everything his father had built. Then the ultimate slap in the face. Once they had seized everything, they informed him that his father's departure from the family had severed his bloodline status, meaning he was no longer recognized as a true member. And so they kicked him out. No noble title, no wealth, no home. The only thing they left him with, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps as a mockery, was a tiny, rundown sky city with a mere 1,000 residents. In the span of a few months, Rocky had gone from ruler of a flourishing metropolis to the lord of a floating village. Anyone else would be furious after suffering such a blatant robbery. But the previous Rocky? He was too weak to fight back. He swallowed the humiliation, bore the insult, and did nothing. Now, after transmigrating, Rocky, the new Rocky, was left to clean up the mess his predecessor had left behind. A mess called Thunderhawk City. Thunderhawk City. The name itself sounded impressive. It evoked images of a mighty floating fortress, a place of power soaring through the skies. The reality? It was barely a city at all. With only 1,000 people, no proper infrastructure, and hardly any resources, calling it a sky city was an insult to actual sky cities. It was nothing more than a floating scrap heap. Rocky let out a deep breath, staring at the ceiling. Fine, he muttered to himself. You want to take everything from me? You want to humiliate me? A sharp glint flashed in his eyes. Then let's see who has the last laugh. The old Rocky was a pushover, a weakling, a fool. But the new Rocky? The new Rocky was going to build an empire in the skies, one that no one would ever take from him again. The burden of a dying city. Just thinking about Thunderhawk City was enough to sour Rocky's already terrible mood. It was small, poor, and barely functioning. An absolute headache for any city lord, let alone someone like him, who had inherited it under miserable circumstances. Just as his frustration was reaching its peak, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. City Lord, Captain Eyre has returned. He's waiting for you in the hall, a calm voice announced as the door creaked open. A young woman stepped inside, her raven-black hair flowing over her shoulders, her leather armor fitting snugly over her athletic frame. A silver-white long sword rested at her waist, glinting under the dim light. She was both dashing and imposing, her sharp features carrying a quiet strength. This was Lilia, Rocky's personal bodyguard and only true confidant, the one person who had followed him to Thunderhawk City. Got it, Rocky replied, pushing himself up from his chair. He naturally liked Lilia, not out of lust or infatuation, but because of the deep connection the original Rocky had with her. She wasn't just a mere bodyguard. She had been his childhood playmate, someone he had trusted completely. In the original Rocky's heart, she had occupied a special place, built on trust and admiration. As he stepped past her, he glanced sideways and smirked. I told you before, just call me by my name. City Lord sounds so distant. Calling you City Lord makes others respect you, Lilia replied coldly, her face completely indifferent. Rocky paused, feeling a little awkward. It was just a casual remark, a small joke to lighten the mood, but Lilia had taken it seriously. Then again, he understood why. The original Rocky had been too weak, so much so that no one in Thunderhawk City took him seriously. Not the officials, not the nobles, not even the common people. Lilia, despite being his closest confidant, knew this all too well. That was why she insisted on treating him with formal respect, because if even she failed to acknowledge him as a leader, then no one else ever would. In this entire city, she was probably the only one who truly respected him. With that thought, Rocky sighed inwardly. He couldn't tell Lilia that the Rocky she once knew was gone, that he was someone completely different now. But even if he didn't say it outright, he was certain she could already sense the change. To break the silence, he changed the topic. Captain Eyre left half a month ago, right? Yes. What exactly did he go to the land for? The moment Rocky asked, he felt embarrassed. Shit, I forgot why he left in the first place. Captain Eyre, the commander of Thunderhawk City's Guard Corps, had suddenly requested to lead a team back to the land. At the time, Rocky had just arrived and was still trying to adjust, so he had simply nodded along without asking for details. Now, he had completely forgotten the reason. Lilia's sharp eyes immediately narrowed at him. He heard rumors about a possible mine nearby, so he took a team to investigate, she explained, disappointment evident in her gaze. Rocky avoided her stare and nodded, trying to recall what he knew about mineral resources in this world. The rarity of resources in the Sky era. Ever since humanity fled to the skies, resources had become scarce, especially minerals. The sky was vast and endless, but it lacked even a single natural or deposit. Yet minerals were crucial. They were the foundation of weapons, tools, and city structures. If a sky city wanted minerals, there was only one option. They had to return to the land and mine them directly. But the land wasn't just empty waiting to be reclaimed. It was now demon territory. Mining was deadly. There was even a saying among miners. Every piece of or represents the life of a miner. This made minerals more valuable than gold, and any vain discovery could determine the future of a sky city. Rocky's expression darkened. So that's why Eyre left. He wasn't just scouting, he was searching for a lifeline. If Eyre finds something, it could change our situation, Lilia said, a rare hint of hope in her voice. Rocky, however, wasn't as optimistic. Hope? That's a little too much to expect, he muttered. It was highly unlikely that Ire would discover an untapped mine. Most mineral veins, whether newly formed or ancient remnants from the land era, were already claimed by the powerful forces of the world. Even if they were lucky enough to find something, so what? Thunderhawk City was too weak to mine it themselves. They lacked the manpower, the tools, and most importantly, the military strength to defend their claim. At best, they'd have to sell the coordinates to someone wealthier and more powerful. Another bitter reminder of how pathetic their situation was. A glimmer of hope, or more trouble. As these thoughts raced through his mind, Rocky arrived at the City Lord's Hall and pushed open the grand double doors. Inside, a man sat at the long table, rising to his feet the moment Rocky entered. City Lord. Rocky walked to his seat at the head of the hall, settling into the City Lord's chair. The man before him was Captain Ire. He was in his early 30s, his face marked by a long scar, making him appear both battle-hardened and ruthless. His sharp gaze carried an edge of worn experience, a look only those who had survived countless battles could have. Ire wasn't new to Thunderhawk City. He had served as its guard captain long before Rocky took over, making him one of the few remaining pillars of the city. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rocky exhaled slowly and asked, "Tell me, Captain Ire, did you find what you were looking for?" Ire's expression remained unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a hint of something serious. "Yes, City Lord," Ire said at last. "But there's a problem." Rocky's fingers drummed against the armrest. "Of course there is. Nothing ever came easy in Thunderhawk City." And something told him this was just the beginning.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
However, Rocky didn't like this person. In his memory, Ire had once deceived his former self. When he had just taken over Thunderhawk City, Ire had lied about military expenses and embezzled a large sum of money. Rocky knew all these things from before, but due to many concerns, he chose to step back. Yet his stepping back was seen as weakness in the eyes of others, causing them to care less and less about him. And obviously, among those who didn't care about Rocky was Ire. "Captain Ire, have you found anything?" Putting aside his dissatisfaction with Ire, Rocky asked with a smile, believing that in time Ire would start respecting him again, as he was no longer the person he used to be. "I'm sorry, City Lord, to disappoint you, but this time I haven't found any new veins." Standing in front of Rocky, Ire spoke as though he hadn't found anything, yet he behaved as if he had won a great victory, puffing out his chest and lifting his head in pride. God, does this man have no shame? Seeing that Ire had clearly made a futile trip, yet assumed such an arrogant demeanor, Rocky couldn't help but get angry. Considering that returning from Sky City to land consumed a lot of resources, and Thunderhawk City, being a small city with scarce resources, could hardly afford such waste. Thinking of this, Rocky's expression turned sour, but he still suppressed his dissatisfaction and then asked, "There were no casualties, right?" The population of Thunderhawk City was only a little over 1,000, with no army of its own, just 200 guards barely maintaining order in the city. Rocky remembered that Ire had taken 30 guards with him. But when he asked this, Ire's face changed. "My lord, we were attacked by demons on the way back, and more than 20 of our brothers died." "What?" Upon hearing Ire's words, Rocky slammed his hand down on the table and stood up. "More than 20 people died? There are only 200 guards in Thunderhawk City. These 200 people normally act as police, and in times of trouble as soldiers. They're the city's only armed force. Yet Ire had just lost a tenth of them. This time, even if Rocky wanted to endure, he couldn't hold back, his anger flaring as he questioned Ire. "Captain Ire, what exactly happened? Why was there such a great loss?" "City Lord, as I said earlier, we encountered a demon attack on the way back. This loss is quite reasonable." However, faced with his questioning, Ire seemed fearless, appearing utterly indifferent, simply repeating what he had said before. His opponent's demeanor infuriated Rocky, his face turning crimson, his eyes glaring at Ire as if he wanted to kill him. He stared intensely at Ire, and Ire likewise looked back at him. The two of them stood in silence, plunging the entire hall into quietness. It was a while before Rocky's face improved slightly. It seemed he had managed to suppress his rage. Then he waved his hand as if giving up. Seeing him wave his hand in resignation, our inwardly sneered, just a useless coward. Even if he had learned to glare, he was still a coward. In Ire's view, this new city lord didn't even count as being tough on the outside but soft on the inside. He was simply a fish on the chopping board, utterly without fear, knowing well that Rocky didn't have the guts to touch him. As for why there had been such heavy losses this time, of course, there was a reason, but it was a reason he had no intention of telling Rocky. But just as Ire was sneering inwardly, Rocky had already whispered something to Lilia. When Rocky finished speaking, Lilia looked surprised, even asking incredulously, "Are you sure?" Rocky nodded. "Are you confident about it?" In disbelief, Lilia smiled after a moment and said confidently, "Almost certain." Having said that, she walked towards the exit of the hall, passing by Ire without a sideways glance. But just as Lilia brushed past Ire, she suddenly lashed out, kicking his knee with such force that it snapped with a crack. The next second she had Ire pinned to the ground, her sword pressed against his throat. "You! What are you doing?" "City Lord!" Captured without any chance to react, Ire endured the severe pain in his knee, his eyes wide with disbelief as he looked at Rocky. This worthless Rocky dared to treat him like this? "Release me, you scoundrel! How dare you treat me like this?" Pinned to the ground, Ire cursed and struggled, only to realize he could not break free from Lilia's restraint. So he could only turn to Rocky. "City Lord, what do you intend to do?" Looking at Rocky sitting in the City Lord's seat, Ire couldn't believe what was happening. This cowardly Rocky, the one who didn't dare to resist even when his father's Sky City was taken from him, dared to lay a hand on him. Was he not afraid that Ire would lead the city guards in rebellion? Before Rocky had taken over Thunderhawk City, Ire had been the captain of the guards, relying on this as his greatest support. Therefore, Ire was certain that Rocky would not dare to touch him. If Rocky dared to act against him, he would not hesitate to lead the guard corps to oust Rocky from his position. Unfortunately, Ire didn't know that the Rocky he was dealing with was not the same as before. The current Rocky had no intention of being a pushover any longer. "Captain Ire!" Ignoring Ire's shouting, Rocky reclined in the City Lord's seat and coldly watched him. "What exactly did you go back to the land for this time? And what did you discover?" "City Lord, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're saying." No sooner had Rocky finished asking that question than the expression on Ire's face changed, becoming extremely uneasy. This change was not lost on Rocky, and it eased his mind somewhat. It seemed his guess was likely on the mark. Actually, while locking eyes with Ire in anger, he had been thinking, and eventually, he came to a clear realization about something. That Ire was deceiving him. Without a doubt, Ire was not loyal to him, which was evident from the other's attitude and actions. So, would a captain of the guards who was disloyal to the city Lord go searching for a mine for Thunderhawk City, or for Rocky's sake, especially when there was a chance of encountering demons? The answer was clearly no. Yet Ire had gone, and during the process, he had indeed encountered danger and lost more than 20 men. Why? Why would Ire take such a great risk to return to the land? The answer was actually quite simple. His return to the land wasn't for the purpose of finding a mine, but rather, he had a different objective. The mission was extremely dangerous, causing the deaths of over 20 guards, but Ire had gone anyway and must have gained something from it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have returned so cocky and arrogant. That was the answer Rocky had come up with, and judging by Ire's recent reaction, this speculation was almost certainly correct. Regrettably, Ire had no intention of confessing. He stared fiercely at Rocky and resolutely said, "City Lord, I don't understand what you are saying." "My lord, I don't know what you've heard, but my trip to the land was truly for Ire's halfway attempt at deception was cut short by a scream, as Lilia, holding him down, viciously struck his knee, immediately causing him to wail in pain. Good teammate. Lilia's action earned her a surreptitious thumbs up from Rocky, grateful for such an understanding girl. It was only after Ire's screaming ceased that Rocky continued. "Tell me, what exactly did you find when you returned to the land?" "I didn't find anything." At that moment, because of the intense pain, Ayer's face turned pale, and the beads of sweat on his forehead grew larger than beans. He could no longer roar as he had before, yet he still tried to talk tough. But the tougher he talked, the more it hinted at a great secret, and the less likely Rocky was to give up. So, Rocky waved his hand, signaling Lilia, who looked like she was about to deal another harsh blow to Ayer, to stop. Rocky, he's not telling the truth. Seeing Rocky restrain her, Lilia urgently called out his name, fearing that Rocky might believe Ayer's slippery defenses. I know. Flashing a grin at Lilia, Rocky, of course, knew Ayer was stubbornly lying, and so he stood up from his seat. He walked slowly over to Ayer, towering above him. Captain Ayer, even the greatest secrets require a life to enjoy. I am very curious. What secret is worth risking your life to protect? You dare to kill me? Suddenly raising his head, Ayer stared at Rocky with a pair of eyes and burst into laughter. You dare to kill me? Rocky, you better think this through. If you kill me, the brothers in the Guard Corps won't let me die in vain. The city guards within the city were Ayer's greatest reliance, all of whom he had personally trained. Therefore, if he died, the Guard Corps would definitely not obey Rocky. However, Rocky had already considered this issue. He looked at Ayer coldly and slowly began to speak. Captain Ayer, are you sure that after your death, the Guard Corps will seek revenge for a dead man? Will they confront the void magic armor for your sake? Void. You actually have void magic armor? Ayer, who was previously full of arrogance, suddenly changed his demeanor upon hearing the words void magic armor, his eyes widening in shock as he looked at Rocky, never expecting him to utter those words. This Rocky actually possesses a set of void magic armor. After the world entered the Sky era, the way warfare was conducted underwent a complete transformation. Warfare in the skies was no longer about soldiers engaging in hand-to-hand combat, but rather battles between floating warships, and the key to determining the outcome of the war was the void magic armor. Void magic armor, second only to the magnificent invention of a sky city, revolutionized the method of warfare. Soldiers clad in void magic armor not only gained the ability to fly, but also a significant increase in combat power. Regardless of whether they had learned magic or not, they could rely on the armor to launch magical attacks. Take Rocky, for example, currently a second-level warrior and a first-level mage. He would just be considered average. But once he donned his void magic armor, the armor's augmentation would transform him into a fourth-level warrior and a third-level mage. And imagine, when soldiers wearing such armor appeared in the skies in formation, what kind of scene that would be and what terrifying combat power they would represent. Rocky had such a set of void magic armor, left to him by his father. Although the previous Rocky was quite feeble and had suffered terribly because of it, no matter what threats or temptations he faced, even if it meant giving away an entire sky city, he never surrendered the void magic armor left by his father, ultimately benefiting the current Rocky by giving him an ace up his sleeve. In the entirety of Thunderhawk City, no one knew about this except for Lilia. Hence, when Ayer learned that Rocky actually had a set of void magic armor, he truly felt fear. Though Ayer was merely a captain of the guards, he had seen a fair bit of the world and was fully aware of how formidable a soldier wearing void magic armor could be. It was simply not something average people could contend with, not even floating warships. The only thing that could contend with void magic armor was another void magic armor. What's more, he didn't believe Rocky was lying. Rocky might be feeble, but he was undoubtedly a true, rich second generation, and it was entirely possible that he had some hidden assets. This realization deflated Ayer like a punctured balloon, transforming him as if he was a different person, no longer resistant or defiant. And at last he spilled the truth. My lord, my trip to the land. Actually, it was to complete a transaction. What transaction? Trafficking the people of the city. What? You actually dared to traffic the people of the city. This time, before Rocky could even speak, Lilia couldn't hold back any longer. You must understand that Thunderhawk City only had about 1,000 inhabitants, which was already the minimum standard for a sky city to operate normally. If the population were to decrease further, Thunderhawk City would become a ghost city, even without outsiders conquering it. But here was Ire, secretly trafficking the people of the city. His actions were utterly destructive to Thunderhawk City. Not only Lilia, but Rocky was also seething with anger. A month of acclimatization had given him a full understanding of this world, and he was well aware of the consequences Ire's actions could bring. He was sucking the blood of Thunderhawk City. At the same time, Rocky felt genuinely relieved, grateful that his rebellion today was so correct. Otherwise, he might not have known about this matter for who knows how long. My lord, please hear me out. This is the first time I'm doing something like this, truly. Knowing that Rocky possessed void magic armor, Ire understood that the Guard Corps was no longer his reliance. And as soon as he noticed a change in Rocky's expression, he began to plead. Keep talking. Rocky, with a grim expression, looked at Ire and said through clenched teeth, Why yes, my lord. I did make an important discovery this time. A very important discovery. Queried by Rocky, Ire clung to that question like a lifeline, immediately saying, My lord, when I returned to the land, I discovered an institution from the land era. What did you say? Ire's words made Rocky furrow his brows in an instant, even doubting if he had heard wrong. It's true. My lord, I really did discover a research institute from the land era, a lost research institute. We were attacked by demons at that time. Fearing that Rocky wouldn't believe him, Ire very affirmatively repeated his statement. He truly had found a lost research institute on the land. 100 years ago, demons invaded from different dimension and drove all races on the continent up into the sky, seizing the land in one fell swoop. During that time, people tried to resist, but the strength of the demons far exceeded their imaginations. Hence, although the resistance war was brutally fought, it only lasted a few years before ending in failure, forcing humans to flee into the sky. However, although the resistance failed, the war spurred magic technology to advance by leaps and bounds. This led to the birth of countless new technologies and equipment, and ultimately the invention of Sky City, the ultimate creation. The birth of Sky City undoubtedly saved everyone, but in actuality, other magic technology was being developed at the same time. These technologies were also revolutionary inventions of their age. It's regrettable that, regrettably, by the end of the Resistance War, large areas of land had fallen, and as people hurried to fly to the sky in Sky Cities, a great escape that involved everyone ensued. Those equally great inventions were either discontinued or abandoned in the process, and even some completed ones never had the chance to be revealed to the world. And these unfinished yet equally great inventions mostly lay forgotten in research institutes across the land. In order to resist the demon invasion, during the Resistance War, numerous countries established many labs to develop new weapons and equipment. But as the Great Escape began, due to the urgency, many research institutes were closed in haste, leaving their contents behind without a chance to be moved. These unemptied research institutes, possibly hiding great inventions, were then known as Lost Research Institutes. Ire's words made Rocky furrow his brows tightly. Could it be that right beneath Thunderhawk City lay a Lost Research Institute? Such an outcome was far beyond his expectations, and it even made it hard for him to breathe steadily. For if it were true, it would be a major discovery, perhaps even more significant than finding a new vein of ore. But could it be possible? Could Ire be so lucky? At this thought, Rocky steadied his breathing and asked with a still icy face, Ire, if you think you can save your life with such a lie, you're very foolish. No, my lord, I'm not lying to you. I truly found a lost research institute, I swear. Ire bit his lip as if making a grave decision before speaking. My lord, actually, the demon attack only killed about a dozen people. But I feared this secret might be leaked. So, I killed those I couldn't trust, leaving only a few confidants. Desperate to make Rocky believe him, Ire had told the ultimate truth. Ire was indeed ruthless. On the one hand, he used the Guard Corps as his support, but on the other, when faced with truly valuable interests, he did not hesitate to get rid of these same guards. However, by saying so, he indeed added some credence to his previous words. The value of the Lost Research Institute was exceptionally great. After all, it might contain high-end magic technology. What was a few lives in the face of such immense interest? Rocky, what do you plan? Unconsciously, Lilia had stopped calling Rocky City Lord. At this moment, she looked up at Rocky, wanting to know his next move. Ar had spilled everything he knew. Now, the next course of action was up to Rocky, the City Lord. At this moment, Rocky was already deep in thought. If there truly was a Lost Research Institute beneath Thunderhawk City, as the City Lord, he faced two choices. Either sell the location of the Institute or personally investigate it. Since the Lost Research Institute could potentially contain high-end magic technology, many people, especially the city lords of many large sky cities, would be willing to pay a hefty sum for the coordinates of the Institute, even if such a venture might yield nothing. But it was like gambling on stones. Even if 100 stones were useless, as long as one stone contained a beautiful jade, the previous investments were all worth it. And even if 100 research institutes yielded nothing, finding advanced magic technology within one institute would likewise make it all worthwhile. Therefore, if Rocky sold the coordinates of the Lost Research Institute, he was sure to fetch a good price, and this money would significantly benefit Thunderhawk City, enough for the city to operate for a very long time. The other option was to personally visit the Institute to see for himself. If he really found something inside the Institute, his good days would be coming. However, this approach involved huge risks. Ar had mentioned before, there were demons near the Institute. There were only 200 men in the entire Thunderhawk City Guard Corps, and they could barely manage to deal with 2 or 3 demons. Facing a large horde of demons. There wouldn't be enough of them even to stick between a demon's teeth. Moreover, even if we set aside the demons, what if Rocky located the Institute, successfully got inside, and found nothing? If he entered the Institute only to discover it was empty, then the Institute would be a waste, of no value to Thunderhawk City, and even the coordinates wouldn't sell. Those big shots who spent money on coordinates didn't want secondhand goods, and besides, these people were the true predators of the sky, not easily fooled. Otherwise, they could easily dispatch a force of void magic armor troops larger than the population of Thunderhawk City and wipe Rocky out with a flick of their wrist. To sell the coordinates for a sure sum of money or to take the risk, the choice was up to Rocky to make. You keep an eye on him. I'm going to change into my armor. After careful consideration for a moment, Rocky told Lilia, already determined in his heart. He was going to take the risk. In just a short time, Rocky thought about a lot. He was well aware that Ar had likely intended to secretly sell the coordinates to walk away with a huge sum of money, but he couldn't do that, because Ar was someone who was satisfied as long as he himself was full, not caring about others. But Rocky was different. He had to think about Thunderhawk City. In this world, the importance of a sky city was beyond words, with countless people dreaming their whole lives of owning one. Luckily, Rocky, who had crossed over, immediately became the lord of a city, a chance given by fate. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away, no matter who he was in his past life or what he had done. What was important now was to develop and strengthen Thunderhawk City. Only by doing so could he survive in this unfamiliar world. So he decided to take the risk, planning to use the void magic armor to personally visit the Research Institute. He demonstrated remarkable decisiveness on this matter, driven as well by necessity. After observing for nearly a month, he deeply comprehended the weakness of Thunderhawk City. Thunderhawk City was already a struggling small city on the verge of a crisis. Now, with him as the new city lord, many others began to harbor ulterior motives, with Ar being a prime example. Didn't Ar know that trafficking people was destroying Thunderhawk City? Of course, he knew, but he did it anyway, clearly hoping to make a fortune and then take off, abandoning Thunderhawk City altogether. And there were definitely more than one person in the city with the same thought. This was the situation that Rocky faced, fraught with internal strife and external threats, leaving him with no choice but to take a gamble. While Lilia watched over Ar in the hall, Rocky quickly returned to his own bedroom. Although he was the lord of Thunderhawk City, his bedroom was not luxurious. This wasn't because he preferred simplicity, but rather because he had no means for luxury. Once inside the bedroom, Rocky closed the door behind him and then pulled out a large leather trunk from under the bed. This large leather trunk had been sitting under the bed for a long time, covered in dust, but no one could imagine that such an inconspicuous trunk contained the most valuable thing in Thunderhawk City: void magic armor. Gently dusting off the trunk, Rocky felt a surge of excitement. Though he knew from memories that he owned a set of void magic armor, he had never seen it or worn it before. So at this moment, he was filled with anticipation. For the current Rocky, Thunderhawk City was the foundation of his survival in this world, and the void magic armor left by his father was the support he could rely on for survival. So, with an excited heart, he slowly opened the leather case. Well, what is this? What is this? The excitement he felt suddenly vanished after opening the case. He didn't see the dazzlingly colorful golden helmet and armor he envisioned, but a pile of scrap metal instead. Indeed, there was a set of armor inside the box, but it was covered in rust, barely looking any different from a heap of discarded metal. This is the void magic armor left by my father? He picked up the armor and inspected it closely, finding a bracer in his hands. It wasn't particularly light, but it was covered in grime and seemed even inferior to common armor, let alone the legendary void magic armor. Why does it even smell? Is it moldy? Looking at the bracer in his hand, Rocky suddenly detected an unpleasant smell. Could it be that it smelled because it had been left to sit for too long and had grown moldy? With this thought, he sniffed it carefully, and after a moment he was shocked. How could there be a smell of blood? Closely sniffing the bracer, Rocky indeed smelled blood. Upon closer inspection of the bracer, he realized that the so-called grime was actually bloodstains that had seeped into the armor. This discovery made him immediately take out the rest of the armor pieces from the case and inspect them, only to realize he was mistaken earlier. The supposed rust on the armor was in fact bloodstains that had soaked into the armor. Such a result completely shocked him. How many battles must it have been through for the enemy's blood to have permeated into the armor? This astonishing discovery inevitably made Rocky think of his father. Since he came from another time, he was not familiar with his father, knowing only through memories that his father was a melancholy man, his gloominess naturally stemming from missing his mother. However, he was also very aware that before becoming melancholic, his father must have been an impressive person. Otherwise, he couldn't have established a family on his own, and even more so, gained power to become the lord of a mid-sized sky city, a feat that ordinary people could not accomplish. The void magic armor before him, especially the bloodstains branded on it, seemed like a book, a blood-written book, recording his father's countless battles. Sigh. Taking a deep breath, Rocky cast aside the disrespect and dissatisfaction in his heart, and then took out every piece of armor from the case. In just a moment, a complete set of void magic armor lay before Rocky, and he then recalled the method of donning it. The greatness of void magic armor lies in the fact that it is entirely different from ordinary armor, which is essentially just clothing with strong defensive power. But void magic armor is not like that. It is embedded with magic stones and driven by mana, providing all-around enhancement and support to the wearer. It is exactly for this reason that the method of donning void magic armor is different from regular armor. It needs to be activated first. With his eyes closed, Rocky recalled the activation method of the void magic armor several times, then opened his eyes and reached out to the armor on the ground with his left hand. Void magic. Armament. Channeling the magic power within his body according to the method from his memories, Rocky immediately felt a connection with the void magic armor. Then he heard a whoosh as the armor's gauntlet suddenly flew up and fit itself onto his hand in the blink of an eye, followed by other parts of the armor flying up and equipping themselves on him without waiting for a reaction. In the blink of an eye, Rocky had fully donned the void magic armor. This is just too cool. Although he had long known that this world followed the path of magic technology, when Rocky personally experienced its marvel, he was left astonished and speechless. It's quite lightweight and flexible too. Having put on the entire set of void magic armor, Rocky couldn't help but move his body around, finding the armor that felt so heavy in his hands now surprisingly light and far more flexible than imagined when worn on his body, without any discomfort at all. He then couldn't resist walking in front of a mirror to look at his own reflection. My God, this is just too cool. Looking into the mirror, Rocky could hardly believe his eyes. Was that incredibly cool figure in the mirror really him? The void magic armor he wore was actually an old model from 40 or 50 years ago. After all, it was his father's armor. By rights, it should have been outdated, but it still looked incredibly formidable. Compared to ordinary armor, the design of void magic armor was much more exaggerated. But it was precisely this exaggeration that made Rocky, clad in the armor, appear imposing and majestic, leaving him stunned. Next, Rocky attempted to control the armor's movement, and found himself surprisingly floating bit by bit into the air. Lilia, I order you to let go of Captain Ire immediately. While Rocky gushed over the merits of the void magic armor, a change had occurred in the city lord's hall. Lilia, who had been waiting here, now held Ire up like a shield before her, confronting a group of people opposite her. The leader of this group was a fat man who appeared to be about 50 years old, bald, and with a face full of fat, looking every bit the cunning fat pig. The man's name was Parolo, an administrative officer of Thunderhawk City. He was currently yelling furiously at Lilia, ordering her to release Captain Ire. To the left and right of Parolo stood two guards, swords drawn and tips pointing straight at Lilia. Lilia, are you deaf? I said to let go of Captain Ire this instant. Glaring venomously at Lilia, Parolo was beside himself with rage, his mind a whirl of chaos. Earlier, Ire had confided that his true purpose for returning to the surface was to traffic humans, and his accomplice in this crime was none other than Parolo. As an administrative officer of Thunderhawk City, Parolo had little to do, for the city was too small, but he was the one who knew the population distribution of the city best. Parolo knew well which people in the city were untouchable and which could disappear without anyone caring. With his help, Ire had managed to capture people for trafficking and sold them off. According to the plan between the two, Ire should have gone to find Parolo to split the loot after reporting to Rocky. But Ire hadn't returned after meeting with Rocky, and Parolo, racked by guilt, suspected something was amiss and decided to find out, leading to the current scene. In truth, when Parolo arrived at the city lord's hall and saw Ire injured, he realized that their misdeeds might have been exposed, throwing him into utmost disarray. In any sky city, human trafficking is a capital offense, punishable by death, a rule that Thunderhawk City was no exception to. Logically, once their human trafficking was exposed, Parolo should have fled immediately. Otherwise, death was certain. Yet he did not, and the reason was simple. Rocky was the city lord of Thunderhawk City. In Parolo's eyes, Rocky was young and inexperienced in governance and, moreover, weak and easily bullied. Parolo believed that if he could just rescue Ire, there might still be a chance to turn things around, especially since Ire was the captain of the guards, with the entire guard corps at his command. For insurance, he had also sent someone to notify the finance officer, planning to pressure Rocky into submission by teaming up with the officers when the time came. Parolo, do you even realize what you are doing? Sword in one hand and supporting Ire with the other, Lilia retreated under the encirclement of the four guards, while coldly addressing Parolo. Parolo, Captain Ire is under arrest by order of the city lord. By asking me to release him, are you suggesting rebellion? Nonsense. The city lord would never issue such an order. Of course, Parolo knew it must be Rocky's command, but he could not admit it and instead had to turn the tables, cursing Lilia internally. If it weren't for Lilia's third-level warrior strength, even stronger than Ire himself, he would have already attacked. That wretch! Given the chance, he would mount her and torture her to death. As these thoughts filled his mind, he was about to speak again when the main doors of the hall burst open and an elderly man with white hair slowly entered. Lord Voss. Upon seeing the elder, Parolo felt a surge of elation and hurriedly approached him, speaking anxiously. Lord Voss, this Lilia is attempting a revolt. She has attacked Captain Ire. This elder was none other than the financial officer of Thunderhawk City. Different from the murderous Ire and the fat-faced Parolo, the elderly Voss, though advanced in years, bore a much more spirited look, exuding a pure aristocratic aura. For instance, now, as I was held captive by Lilia and Parolo was in a state of urgency, Voss entered with a calm smile, and after seeing everything around him, his face still held that calm smile, as if the tense standoff in the hall did not exist to him. So after Parolo finished speaking, Voss looked toward Lilia. "Miss Lilia, may I ask if the order to capture Captain Ire came from the city lord himself?" "Yes," Lilia replied to Voss, succinct and clear. "I see." Voss nodded and continued. "In that case, may we see the city lord to have him explain what exactly is going on?" Voss spoke with no sign of urgency. However, just as he finished speaking, the doors were flung open again, and Rocky, clad in void magic armor, flew in. Indeed, he flew in, directly over the heads of Parolo and Voss, landing in front of Lilia. "Lord Voss, what is it that you would like me to explain?" Standing firmly in front of Lilia, Rocky smiled triumphantly at her, then turned to look at Voss and Parolo, his expression turning grim. Rocky had never imagined that in the short while he was away, the situation would have evolved into this. Parolo and Voss, along with our who had been captured, all the officials of Thunderhawk City were present. What were they planning to do? And those 4 guards pointing their swords at Lilia, what were they doing? Staging a coup or rebelling? The scenes unfolding before his eyes filled Rocky with fury, and he shifted his gaze from Voss and Parolo to the 4 guards pointing their long swords at Lilia. "What are you trying to do, rebel?" Before the guards before him could even react, Rocky aimed his palm at one of them and immediately gathered a magic bullet, firing it in an instant. The magic bullet, the most basic magical attack of the void magic armor, uses mana to form a pure magic sphere that can be fired like a cannonball and has the power equivalent to one. With a loud bang, the magic bullet hit the chest of one of the guards, and the struck guard was sent flying out before he even had the chance to scream. Clang, clang, clang. This spectacle made the remaining 3 guards quickly drop their swords like hot potatoes and kneel before Rocky. "City Lord, spare our lives. It wasn't us trying to rebel. It was Parolo who instructed us to do this. My lord, it was Parolo who told us to do it. It's not our fault." Kneeling before Rocky, the 3 guards begged for mercy nonstop, immediately pinning the blame on Parolo as if fearing that if they were too slow, Rocky would fire another magic bullet at them. As for Parolo, mentioned by the guards, he had already been frightened out of his wits by this point, staring dazedly at Rocky with eyes bulging as wide as cowbells, nearly dropping to the ground. "Void magic armor. Void magic armor. How is this possible?" Seeing Rocky clad in a set of void magic armor and having knocked down a guard right off the bat, Parolo was so frightened that his legs trembled, and he almost sat down on the floor. He had never anticipated such an outcome. How could Rocky possess a set of void magic armor? In contrast to the terrified Parolo, Voss beside him remained much calmer. Yet even he was slightly startled upon seeing Rocky, the smile that had been constant on his face freezing for a moment. But soon he regained his composure. All these reactions were keenly observed by Rocky, and they perfectly matched his impression of the 2 men. Parolo was a dumb pig, while Voss was as sly as a fox. So Rocky didn't bother with Parolo at all, but instead changed his grim expression to a smile, looking at Voss. "Lord Voss, what was it that you wanted me to explain just now?" "My lord, please don't misunderstand. That was my indiscretion." Hearing Rocky's words, Voss bowed to him with an unchanged expression, and then spoke calmly. "I wouldn't dare ask my lord to explain anything. I'm just very curious to know what crime Captain Ire has actually committed." Voss spoke neither humbly nor arrogantly, showing respect to Rocky while also getting his question across. Unless Rocky wanted to find fault deliberately, there seemed to be no flaw in his words. However, there was no need to find fault with Ire's case. Rocky directly said, "Captain Ire has been unlawfully trafficking the population of Thunderhawk City, so I detained him for further interrogation." "Any problems with that?" Sitting back in the city lord's position, Rocky spoke casually, and Voss did not inquire further. Seeing Voss remaining silent, Rocky then turned to Parolo and asked coldly, "Parolo, was it you who ordered these guards to threaten Lilia?" "My lord, have mercy. This is a misunderstanding. I wanted to—" Thumping to his knees on the ground, Parolo continuously begged for mercy, yet he couldn't come up with any excuse and could only sneak glances at Voss, as if hoping Voss would intercede on his behalf. Interestingly, at this moment, Rocky also looked at Voss and even added, "Lord Voss, Captain Eyre is trafficking people. Parolo is insubordinate. What do you think should be done with these two?" Rocky's question seemed casual, but in reality, he was probing Voss's attitude, because in his mind, Voss was the one person to be wary of. In Rocky's eyes, Eyre and Parolo were not of much concern. Neither of them needed him to employ any strategies. A set of void magic armor was more than enough to deal with them, and indeed, that was the case. But Voss was different because among the three, he was the only one with real power, and this power, even Rocky couldn't shake. Thunderhawk City was very small, so small that there was virtually no industry to speak of. The over 1,000 residents living in the city could only rely on two means for their livelihood: farming and textiles. Typically, each Sky City is surrounded by vast tracts of farmland to solve the food problem. Thunderhawk City was no different, with most of the city's residents living off the land around the city. However, being a small Sky City, even with farmland, it was not enough to feed all the residents. This gave rise to the city's second industry, textiles. Importing yarn from other Sky Cities, and then having the women of the city spin it into cloth before selling it. They would use the income from selling the cloth to buy food. This was how the residents of Thunderhawk City made a living. As the financial officer of the city, not only did Voss control the city's finances, but more importantly, he had close connections with all the chambers of commerce involved in importing yarn. So it's no exaggeration to say that if Thunderhawk City were to lose Voss, the financial officer, then the city's textile industry would immediately fall into paralysis, and those residents who relied on textiles for their living would starve to death. The reason Voss was feared lay exactly in this. Rocky could deal with Eyre and Parolo with thunderous methods, but he could not treat Voss the same, because this man was too important to Thunderhawk City. Therefore, Rocky asked Voss for his opinion at this time to gauge his attitude towards himself. But somewhat unexpectedly, Voss's response came quickly, as if he had been well prepared. "My lord, trafficking in people is a serious crime, with the mastermind being executed and the family members and other participants being expelled from the city, banished to the land. Rebellion against one's superiors is equally a grave offense, where the death penalty may be spared but not the punishment. The main culprits and their families should all be expelled from the city, banished to the land." Facing Rocky's question, Voss didn't show the slightest change in expression and began to speak. You. His words not only stunned Rocky, but also left Parolo, who was expecting him to plead on his behalf, pale-faced and so furious he couldn't speak. This old fox was too decisive, wasn't he? Such an answer left Rocky feeling a chill down his spine. He remembered clearly that while Voss had not deceived him like Eyre had, there was certainly no respect shown towards him. There was more of an ignoring, disregarding himself as the city lord. Yet from Voss's stance earlier, it was clear he was drawing a line between himself and Eyre and Parolo, almost as if he was helping Eyre eliminate the two of them. Was it possible that Voss had now acknowledged him as the city lord? Looking at Voss, who stood with his hands hanging at his sides, Rocky couldn't fathom the old fox's thoughts. But since the other party had already taken the initiative to speak for him, he certainly didn't need to be reserved or cautious and said directly. In that case, while speaking, he looked at the three guards kneeling on the ground. "From today on, you will be under Lilia's command. Now, take Parolo to the prison to await further handling. And if anything happens during this process, I'll hold you responsible." Yes. Thank you, my lord. Thank you, city lord." The three guards, without a second thought, immediately seized Parolo, mere moments before they had been his guards, but now they were the ones taking him to prison. After Parolo was taken away, Rocky turned to look at Voss. "Lord Voss, if there's nothing else, you may go now." "Yes." After agreeing, Voss gave Rocky a slight bow and left the city lord's hall. He was the same as when he had come, as if nothing had happened at all. Watching his figure leave the hall, Rocky finally let out a long sigh of relief. He truly hadn't expected things to turn out this way. It was just as well that Voss had not challenged him, because, given his status and importance, Voss would not have been an easy adversary. However, it was also thanks to what had just happened that the two cancers, Ire and Parolo, were suddenly removed. This was indeed an unexpected blessing for Rocky, saving him quite a bit of trouble. How was it? I did quite well just now, didn't I? Pleased with the outcome, Rocky turned to Lilia and posed the question, looking like a child seeking praise and completely lacking the imposing air he had just moments before. His action caught Lilia off guard, but she nodded and then looked at Rocky. You seem different. Of course I'm different, and I'll keep getting better. Laughing heartily, Rocky instructed Lilia, gather 50 guards and arrest everyone who returned with Ire. Deal with any who dare to resist, as you see fit. Then take your men to meet me at the skyport. Understood? After she agreed, Lilia handed Ire over to Rocky and hurried out of the hall. Once Lilia had left, Rocky turned his glance to Ire, his face beaming with a smile. Captain Ire, let us make another trip to the land, shall we? Yes. I'll follow your lead. My lord, having witnessed everything that had just transpired, Ire no longer had the courage to refuse. He now profoundly understood that Thunderhawk City was about to see a change in the tides. Having left the City Lord's Hall with Ire, Rocky came to Thunderhawk City. As a small sky city with just over 1,000 residents, Thunderhawk City was naturally not large. Standing on the high steps and looking out, Rocky could easily see the entire cityscape at a glance. His eyes swept over the city and soon fixed on the square at the city center where a magic crystal, over 10 meters tall, hovered, looking incredibly eye-catching. This huge magic crystal, known as a drive crystal, was not just a decoration, but the core of the entire Sky City. The power that allowed the city to fly through the air was all provided by this drive crystal. At the same time, the drive crystal spread out an invisible defensive net above the city, like a giant umbrella enveloping the city, which could defend against external attacks during wartime and block high winds during regular times. When the Sky City was first invented, the drive crystal had to be manually charged. After nearly a century of development, the drive crystal no longer required manual charging. It could now be self-sufficient, relying on solar and wind energy, which not only eliminated much hassle, but also saved a vast amount of resources. Truly spectacular. Although it wasn't his first time leaving the City Lord's mansion, every time he saw the huge drive crystal, Rocky would still be struck by awe. The grandeur and wonder of magic technology struck him afresh each time. It was only after a while that he took Ire and boarded a carriage, heading straight for Thunderhawk City's skyport. Since the onset of the Sky Era, carriages had become the means of transport within cities. To travel beyond Sky City, one had to take a skyship, similar to how sea voyages were made in the past, only that the ports had turned into skyports now. Leaving the City Lord's mansion, the carriage sped away, all residents deliberately making way, and upon seeing that it was Rocky sitting inside the carriage, some even voluntarily saluted him. The behavior of the residents was even slightly unsettling for Rocky. But this was not surprising. Although in the eyes of people like Ire and Parolo, Rocky might seem like a weak city lord, the ordinary residents of Thunderhawk City were unaware of these matters. They only knew Rocky as the city lord, who had the authority over life and death for everyone in the city, so they both respected and feared him. Under these circumstances, the carriage naturally had an unobstructed path, quickly arriving at the skyport. Since the skyport was used to dock skyships, it covered a vast area. Upon arriving, Rocky hadn't even alighted when, through the carriage window, he saw 10 docked skyships in the harbor. These skyships were slightly larger than fishing boats, equipped with a magic cannon at both the bow and stern, capable of carrying 20 people. They were early models of reconnaissance skyships, constituting the entire aerial force of Thunderhawk City. Over 1,000 residents, 200 guards, and 10 reconnaissance skyships, plus a set of void magic armor, and a Lilia. This was the entirety of Rocky's assets. City Lord! City Lord! Rocky, along with Ire, alighted from the carriage, and the guards at the skyport immediately ran up to him. The guards had not expected the sudden appearance of Rocky, their city lord. It was surprising enough, and even more startling was the fact that Rocky was dressed in a suit of void magic armor. Thus, the expression on their faces when they saw Rocky was not just surprise, but outright fear. They also saw Ire, who looked like a prisoner. The guards weren't fools and kept their mouths shut at this time. Who was in charge here? Looking at the group of guards before him, Rocky asked, City Lord, it's me. A young man, looking about 26 or 27 years old, dressed in leather armor, spoke up, looking quite spirited. What's your name? Rocky asked after looking over the young man. City Lord, I'm Felly. Perhaps it was because it was his first time facing the City Lord. Felly was incredibly nervous, and even his name didn't come out fluently. His response somewhat pleased Rocky, finally giving him a bit of the sense of being the lord of the city. After the pleasured moment, he said with a smile, Felly, I need 5 skyships to be ready for liftoff as soon as possible. You arrange it. Yes. Rocky saluted, and Felly immediately called a guard nearby, and then led a group of men away. Due to the sudden development, it took some time to get the skyship off the ground, but this process coincided with Lilia's arrival. Following Rocky's previous orders, she went to the Guard Corps' camp and gathered 50 guards, and then personally arrested everyone who had returned with Ire. Everyone is here? Looking at the 6 guards tied up tightly, Rocky asked. There was one who tried to resist. He's already dead. Rocky nodded, which was not unexpected. The guards who followed Ire to engage in human trafficking and were still alive were naturally his confidants. These people would definitely understand what was happening when they heard Lilia was going to arrest them. It's not surprising that they tried to resist, as trafficking humans is a capital crime, and being caught means execution. This was why Rocky had sent Lilia to arrest them. Lilia, being a 3rd-level warrior, was the strongest in the Guard Corps, where the strongest was only 2nd level. Thus, resistance would be futile. The outcome was just as expected. Rocky glanced over the 6 men brought before him, then looked at the guards behind Lilia, but said nothing. However, the less he spoke, the more fearsome he seemed, especially to the 50 guards assembled there. These guards might not be Ire's closest aides, but were still part of the Guard Corps. They had heard, more or less, about Ire's deeds, and some had even heard Ire mocking Rocky, calling him a weak and incompetent city lord. But now, it seemed this city lord was far from weak. In these soldiers' eyes, not only was Rocky not incompetent, but he also appeared quite imposing. Looking at him clad in void magic armor, and then at Ire, whose legs had been broken, made clear who the superior was. Undoubtedly, Rocky, dressed in void magic armor, had left these guards in awe. This awe inadvertently cemented their recognition of him as the city lord. Even if Ire were to incite a rebellion at this moment, these guards would not follow him and might even arrest him voluntarily. And this was naturally the result Rocky wanted to see. Sir, city lord, the skyships are ready. Already ready. Felly, who had previously led the men away, quickly returned. He saluted before Rocky, then reported breathlessly that 5 skyships were prepared for takeoff and could launch at any moment. Good. Turning around, Rocky shouted to the guards behind him, Everyone, listen to the command. Yes. His shout caused all the guards to instinctively straighten up, staring straight at him. Groups of 10 board the ship immediately. Yes. The guards shouted in unison at the end of Rocky's command, then quickly rushed toward the 5 skyships prepared for takeoff. Watching the guards spring into action without delay, Rocky was somewhat surprised. He hadn't expected Ire to have trained these soldiers so well. Perhaps they were not on par with the regular army, but at least they were disciplined. Felly, take these men and put them on the ship too. After instructing Felly to take the 6 tied-up men to the ship, Rocky boarded the skyship with Lilia. With a command from Rocky as he boarded, the 5 skyships slowly took off, and once they had flown out of Thunderhawk City's defensive net, they turned their bows downward and flew toward the land. Standing at the bow of the skyship, Rocky could only see thick clouds, but even so, he was still very excited. This was his first time riding a skyship away from Thunderhawk City, and also his first time heading to the land below, so he couldn't help but feel a little thrilled. The land had been occupied by demons, which was the first thing Rocky learned after coming to this world. But what then? Was the demon-occupied land now devastated and unrecognizable, damaged beyond repair? Had all the other creatures on the land died out? And those who hadn't managed to reach Sky City all those years ago, could they have survived after so many years? Rocky had no answers to these questions, but he was about to see for himself. "Sir, please come back to the cabin. Outside, the wind is too strong." As Rocky stood alone in his excitement, Lilia's voice came from behind him. Turning around, he saw Lilia struggling through the strong wind. Traveling at an altitude of tens of thousands of meters, one could imagine the strength of the winds outside the skyship. Even Lilia, a third-level warrior, was having trouble keeping her eyes open and found it difficult to speak on the deck, which was despite the fact that the skyship had its defensive net spread out to block the winds. Without the protection of the defensive net, a gust of wind could easily have blown Lilia away. "I'm fine. I'm just getting used to the void magic armor." Compared to Lilia, who was struggling to walk on the deck, Rocky seemed unaffected by the strong wind, a feat naturally credited to the void magic armor. Designed specifically for aerial combat, the void magic armor was covered with an energy shield from top to bottom. This energy shield acted like a miniature defensive net, not only increasing defensive power, but also blocking the vicious wind, offering protection to its wearer even during high-speed flight. That's why Rocky, standing at the bow, didn't feel the strong wind at all. But Lilia was a stubborn girl. She didn't turn around and leave. Instead, she bravely stood by Rocky's side, despite the howling wind. "Sir, you? Just call me Rocky, it sounds less awkward." Turning to glance at Lilia, Rocky repeated his request with a smile. This time, Lilia didn't respond with the cold reply she had given before. Biting her lip, she eventually nodded. "Rocky." Hearing his name from Lilia's mouth made Rocky inexplicably feel a wave of relief, much more comfortable than when others called him City Lord. "Rocky, do you really plan to personally explore the Research Institute?" While Rocky was basking in that moment, Lilia brought up her question. At that time, the skyship was en route to the land. Amidst the strong winds, aside from Rocky, clad in void magic armor, and Lilia, a third-level warrior, no one else dared to come to the deck, which made their conversation private, with no chance of being overheard. Lilia took this opportunity to ask, "Yes, I want to go there myself." Nodding, Rocky didn't hide his intentions. "But that's too risky. I think we should just confirm the exact location of the Research Institute and sell the coordinates. We would still make a lot of money from that, money enough to support Thunderhawk City for a long time." Standing behind Rocky, Lilia voiced her thoughts. But in response to his words, Rocky simply shook his head. Thunderhawk City needs more than just a sum of money. Just a sum of money can't change Thunderhawk City. After finishing his statement, he turned around. "You don't need to worry about me. Even if I really encounter demons, I can retreat unharmed with the help of the void magic armor, so it's fine. You can't rely too much on the armor." However, the intended comfort from Rocky had the opposite effect, invoking Lilia's dissatisfaction. "You're only a second-level warrior, with no actual combat experience. You can't exert the power of the armor like the old master did. Over-reliance on the armor could cost you your life." The old master Lilia referred to as naturally Rocky's father. She had fought alongside him and had witnessed his gallant form donning the void magic armor. Therefore, in Lilia's eyes, though Rocky might be wearing the void magic armor now, he was still a far cry from his father. That left Rocky with no choice but to roll his eyes. Must she be so blunt? What about respect? Unfortunately, even though he grumbled inwardly, he couldn't refute her because what Lilia said was true. His own strength was indeed too average. Even with the enhancement of the void magic armor, he couldn't afford to be careless, especially since the foes he would face were not like Ire. Left with no other option, Rocky had to play hardball. He verbally agreed to all of Lilia's demands, but didn't budge in his actions, eventually frustrating Lilia to the point that she simply walked away. Watching Lilia's retreating back, Rocky shook his head with a wry smile, then stopped pondering other matters and began to adjust his own state. Lilia's admonitions had not fallen on deaf ears. On the contrary, they had sounded a warning bell for him. He must not become complacent just because he had the void magic armor, for he might be facing demons this time. The void magic armor was indeed strong, beyond doubt. Yet even so, there was no certainty of victory when facing demons. Otherwise, after the invention of the void magic armor, people would have counterattacked the land long ago. Instead, they remained adrift in the sky, and so Rocky continually reminded himself not to be careless. Not long after he adjusted his state alone, the speed of the skyship began to decrease gradually, and the gusts of wind surrounding them started to weaken, transitioning from the initial howling gales to a gentle breeze. Clearly, they had arrived at land. Standing at the bow and looking down, Rocky no longer saw thick clouds beneath him, but the silhouette of land. A stretch of green? When Rocky looked towards the land, he didn't see the devastation or scarring he had imagined. Instead, he saw a verdant and beautiful vista. Is this really the land? Looking at the lush forests beneath the skyship, Rocky was stunned. He hadn't expected the land to look like this. Hadn't they said the land was occupied by demons? Hadn't they said the demons had destroyed the land? Yet why was this forest before his eyes so beautiful? Rocky, prepare for landing. Just as Rocky was astounded by the sight before him, Lilia emerged from the cabin and informed him that the skyship was ready to land. Okay. He nodded and followed Lilia back into the cabin, after which the 5 skyships began to descend slowly. And when the 5 skyships landed smoothly, Rocky disembarked with the guards, stepping firmly onto the land that had been occupied by demons. Having left the cabin and arrived on land, everyone, including Rocky, couldn't help but let out a gasp of surprise and admiration, because the scenery before them was simply too beautiful. So beautiful that not only was Rocky surprised, but even the guards behind him felt the same way. In fact, it was not only Rocky's first time returning to land, but many of the guards behind him were also experiencing this for the first time. So these guards, like Rocky, were filled with novelty and curiosity about everything they saw. The skyship had landed just on the edge of the forest, so as everyone looked ahead, they saw a dense forest, and behind them, an endless prairie. Everything looked immensely beautiful, with no trace of ruin. Don't be deceived by what you see. As everyone marveled at the beautiful scene before them, Lilia spoke up, addressing the guards. The land has long been occupied by demons, so don't be fooled by what you see. Behind this beautiful scenery, there could be demons ready to tear you apart. So, all of you, be on alert. Such a speech made all the guards come to their senses, as everyone quickly diverted their gaze and instinctively lowered their heads. It had to be said that Lilia held a significant position in the hearts of these guards, primarily due to her status as a third-level warrior. And unlike these inexperienced guards, Lilia had accompanied Rocky's father in multiple battles, not only gaining experience in leading troops, but also visiting the surface several times. Hence her understanding of the land far exceeded others. Therefore, even Rocky took her words seriously and swiftly diverted his gaze as well. Bring ire, and then you lead the guard squad here and wait for me. Calming his excited emotions, Rocky then said to Lilia beside him, now was indeed not the time to admire the scenery. He had to attend to important matters. Although the land was not as devastated as imagined, even quite scenic, it did not change anything. The fact that the land was occupied by demons was an ironclad reality. In such circumstances, Rocky did not want to waste time. The more time they delayed, the greater the chance they would encounter demons. Following his instructions, Lilia quickly brought ire, but did not hand him over to Rocky. I'm going with you. After bringing ire, Lilia told Rocky that she intended to join him in searching for the Institute. No, but to her request, Rocky rejected it outright without even thinking. I outrank you and have experience fighting demons. I can help you. Rocky's abrupt refusal caught Lilia off guard as he seemed more resolute, reflecting his determination on this matter. As expected, Rocky was very steadfast, shaking his head. I can rest easy knowing you are here guarding. But, no buts. Not wanting to argue further, Rocky then took Ire, who had his hands bound, from Lilia's hands, and then slowly levitated, carrying Ire towards the distant forest. Seeing him fly away like this, Lilia stomped her foot fiercely and immediately said to the guards behind her, "Everyone, be ready to fight. The skyship should be ready to take off at any moment. As soon as the city lord returns, we'll leave immediately." "Yes." At her command, the guards immediately sprang into action, knowing well the dangers of the land. A moment's laxity could mean death by a demon's attack, so no one dared to slack off. Lilia should be left out of the conversation for now. Rocky had already taken our soaring into the sky above the forest. "Captain Ire, tell me the exact location of the Institute," Rocky said. "Sir, it's too high. I can't confirm." Being carried in the air by Rocky, Ire trembled all over in fear, but he did not lie. From the air, he truly couldn't pinpoint the location of the Institute. With this, Rocky had no choice but to descend slowly and land in the forest. As he landed in the forest, Rocky noticed that the vegetation was incredibly dense, almost overly so. It was filled with unnamed green plants, looking much like a tropical rainforest. "Sir, if you keep going in this direction, you should find the Institute," Ire said. Upon landing on the ground, Ire breathed a sigh of relief. Being in the air had terrified him, as he was not the one wearing the void magic armor, but rather it was Rocky. If Rocky had let go, he would have been smashed to death. "Are you sure?" As Rocky turned around, he frowned, because as he looked in the direction Ire had indicated, he suddenly felt a pang of distress. This sensation was quite peculiar. All he saw before him was a forest, no demons or other threats, yet Rocky still felt this way. And even, he felt somewhat scared. "Sir, you felt it too, right? Is that it?" Just as Rocky furrowed his brows, Ire suddenly said, "Sir, I also felt something was off initially, which is why I went to check, and then I discovered the Institute." "Oh!" This intrigued Rocky, so he immediately asked, "So, it is the demons who are emitting this feeling?" Ire had previously mentioned that after discovering the Institute, he was attacked by demons. So, could this distressing sensation be emitted by the demons? But Ire's next reply surprised Rocky, as he shook his head repeatedly. "Sir, demons don't have that ability. I think it might be some kind of equipment in the Institute that's emitting it to keep the demons at bay. Where could there be such equipment? That's just ridiculous." Upon hearing this, Rocky couldn't help but laugh. There couldn't possibly be the kind of equipment Ire described. Demons aren't mosquitoes that one could simply fend off with a mosquito coil. Ire had clearly mythologized the Lost Research Institute. Thus, after shaking his head, Rocky didn't ask further and simply led Ire deeper into the forest. The forest was truly dense, not just thick with bushes, but with many other forms of vegetation as well. Coupled with Ire, who had a limp leg, this made Rocky's pace extremely slow. Fortunately, they encountered no demons along the way, so although the journey was long, it was safe. After an indeterminate amount of time had passed, Rocky stopped in his tracks because there was a corpse in front of him, a guard's corpse. "Sir, we've arrived." Looking at the body lying on the ground, Ire stammered out, and the guard now turned into a corpse was one of those he had silenced. And finding these guards meant that the Lost Research Institute was nearby. Since they had found the guard who was silenced, it was clear that the Lost Research Institute was not far away. "Did you kill these people?" Yes. Faced with Rocky's icy gaze, Ire quickly lowered his head, not daring to meet his eyes. "How many people did you kill? Do you remember?" Suddenly asked about this, Ire was stunned. He really didn't remember how many guards he had killed to keep the secrets of the Institute, because all he wanted back then was to keep a tight lid on the secrets, so he killed everyone he couldn't trust. "Think hard." Seeing Ire stammering and unable to answer, Rocky shouted at him, making Ire shiver all over. "Sir, it should be 8 people." "8 people? But there are only 5 corpses here." As Rocky spoke, he looked down at the corpses on the ground. Indeed, as he said, there were only 5 corpses. If I was not mistaken, that meant 3 corpses were missing. When he mentioned this, I also looked down at the corpses on the ground, noticing indeed that there were fewer than when he had left. This realization made his face turn pale as he quickly looked up at Rocky. It's demons. Sir, it must be the demons that ate the corpses. That's possible. This time, Rocky didn't counter ire, but simply nodded in agreement. Although he had never seen a demon with his own eyes, remember that the original Rocky was a proper nobleman, educated at a higher level. So, through what was recorded in books, he knew quite a bit about demons. One thing he remembered the most was that, according to the books, demons ate humans. This was not just a rumor. It was a fact written in the textbooks, so it should be correct. If demons indeed ate humans, then it assured that demons truly existed nearby. They were the ones who had taken the 3 missing corpses. Sir, let's leave. It's too dangerous here with demons around. Thinking of possibly encountering demons again, I was terrified. Although he had encountered a demon once before, at that time he was accompanied by 30 guards. By sheer force of numbers, they had managed to escape the demon's attack. Yet even then, more than 10 had died. And I only encountered 1 demon last time. Just 1 demon, and 30 armed and trained guards fled in total disarray. So, when I realized there were still demons nearby, he was utterly panicked. Now, there were just the 2 of them, Rocky and himself. Rocky might rely on void magic armor, but he was a cripple and would surely die if they encountered a demon. But how could Rocky listen to him? He continued forwards without even bothering to respond, leaving a terrified Ire to hurry after him, not daring to stay alone in that place. So, the 2 walked another 100 meters through the forest, then once again found corpses on the ground. Just like before, numerous guards' corpses lay haphazardly on the ground. Only this time, there were obvious signs of battle. Some corpses were even torn apart, creating a very gruesome scene. Were you attacked by demons here? This time, without needing Ire's explanation, Rocky already figured out what had happened. Yes, we were attacked here. The entrance to the Research Institute. It's behind that huge rock. Nodding, Ire pointed with his hand toward a huge rock in the distance. Following the direction of his hand, Rocky indeed saw a huge rock nearby, its size like that of a small hill, standing out prominently in the forest. At last, they had found it. Seeing the huge rock, a surge of excitement filled Rocky's heart, and he grabbed Ire and leaped into the air, flying directly towards it. Moments later, he landed steadily in front of the huge rock and truly saw a large door on the rock wall. It looked like Ire hadn't lied to him after all. There really was a lost research institute here. Setting Ire aside, Rocky quickly walked up to the stone gate and noticed a pattern imprinted on the thick door. After brushing all the dust off the stone gate, the pattern revealed its true form, looking like a crest. This seems like a national emblem. I must have seen it somewhere. At a moment like this, his past memories served him well. The old Rocky might have been timid, but he loved to read and had read a variety of books, so the pattern on the stone gate seemed familiar, as if he had seen it in one of those books before. I remember now. This is the emblem of Cohen country. After careful thought, he recalled seeing this pattern in a book about the history of the land era. This was the national emblem of Cohen country. Cohen country was a massive nation during the land era, with extensive territories and strong military and economic prowess, rightfully considered a global powerhouse at the time. This powerhouse nation, a stalwart during war periods, had established numerous research institutes to develop new weapons and equipment. It seems like the institute before them was indeed one established by Cohen country then. Wait here for me. After confirming that this was a research institute left by Cohen country, Rocky turned to look at Ire, clearly planning to enter the research institute alone. Don't leave me here. My lord, please. However, upon hearing this, Ire panicked immediately, as he dared not stay in this place alone. But Rocky completely ignored his plea and directly pushed the stone gate with his hands. As Rocky pushed the stone gate with his hand, it felt as though he was pushing a mountain, and the stone gate did not budge at all. He then placed both hands on the stone gate and exerted force fiercely, but still, the gate did not open. What's going on? This result made him frown. With the augmentation of void magic armor, he had reached the level of a 4th-level warrior, far surpassing ordinary people. How could he possibly not push open this stone gate? There must be a mechanism. A moment later, he realized the reason the stone gate could not be opened by brute force was definitely that there was a mechanism. Thinking this, he began to search around. But after feeling up and down the stone gate, even walking around the massive stone twice, he found absolutely no mechanism. What should I do now? He kept thinking. Seeing Rocky blocked, Art could not help but sneer inwardly. He too had tried to open the stone gate when he discovered this place, but all methods had been useless, so he knew Rocky would definitely also fail. The inability to open it was for the best, so Art did not have to stay here alone, he thought gleefully. Right? I should use magic power. But just as Art was reveling in misfortune, Rocky suddenly slapped his forehead, having finally thought of something. He then placed his hand on the national emblem of Cohen country and started channeling the magic power within his body towards the stone gate. Subsequently, a thunderous boom was heard, and the stone gate in front of him began to vibrate violently, then slowly opened. It worked! Watching the stone gate slowly opening, Rocky breathed a sigh of relief, turned back to look at the bewildered Ire, smiled slightly, and walked through the stone gate. My lord! Wait for me! Take me with you! Seeing that Rocky truly opened the stone gate and was actually leaving him behind alone, Ire hurriedly rushed over. Unfortunately, being lame, he was not quick on his feet, and before he had taken 2 steps, the stone gate slowly closed. Ignoring the cries and screams of Ire left outside, Rocky discovered upon entering the stone gate a tunnel that led underground, indicating that the Research Institute was built underground. This was a clever decision, for with the strength of the demons, if the Institute had been built on the land surface, it would undoubtedly be easily destroyed. Building it underground was different. I hope this time I really find something. Taking a deep breath, Rocky, with a trace of anticipation, started walking towards the depths of the tunnel. However, he had barely taken a few steps when lights appeared before him, and the magic lamps on the tunnel walls lit up all at once. There's still mana here? Looking at the magic lamps lighting up the tunnel, Rocky was somewhat surprised. This research institute had existed for nearly 100 years. How could there still be a mana reserve? Truly miraculous. No wonder the lords of the major sky cities were willing to pay a large sum for the coordinates of the Lost Research Institute. This place was indeed extraordinary. Being immediately stunned upon arrival at the Institute undoubtedly bolstered Rocky's confidence, so he immediately continued walking towards the deeper parts of the tunnel. Yet, just like earlier, as soon as he attempted to move, the situation occurred once again. This time, a voice came from the depths of the tunnel. Someone has finally found this place. Who? Hearing someone speaking, and moreover speaking to him, not only was Rocky shocked, but he was also frightened. Come quickly. I do not know who you are, but I have been waiting here too long, so hurry. The voice coming from the depths of the tunnel paid no heed to Rocky, continuing to speak, seemingly eager for him to come quickly. The voice from deep within the tunnel sent a chill down Rocky's spine. This place, could it be haunted? When people fled to the sky, nations hurriedly closed all research facilities and evacuated their personnel, so it was impossible for anyone to be here. But what was that sound just now? Could it really be haunted? Shaking his head, Rocky dismissed the ridiculous thought, mustered his courage, and began to walk down the tunnel step by step. No matter if it was haunted or not, since he had come, he couldn't leave empty-handed, whether for himself or for Thunderhawk City. He had to find out what was going on here. So he quickly adjusted his mindset and, with full attention, started to walk toward the depths of the tunnel. The tunnel was far longer than he had imagined. Rocky walked downward for a long time without reaching the end. It felt as though the tunnel had no end at all, which only underscored how deep underground this research facility was. However, this in itself was normal, much like the stone gate outside. These were all security measures designed to prevent the demons from destroying the facility. Finally, After walking nearly 1,000 meters down, Rocky reached the end of the tunnel where another stone gate appeared in front of him. Throughout the journey, Rocky hadn't encountered any other strange occurrences. The voice from before hadn't appeared again, so his mood had calmed considerably by now. With previous experience in mind, he placed his hand directly on the stone gate and channeled the magic power within him. A rumbling sound followed as the stone gate slowly rose from the bottom up, allowing Rocky to walk inside. Beyond the stone gate was a giant laboratory filled with dozens of research stations, each laden with various pieces of research equipment. Just as the rumors said, upon entering the stone gate, Rocky glanced around and approached the nearest research station. Looking down, he found a magic stone and an unfamiliar instrument, both covered with thick layers of dust. It looked like when people fled to the sky, they were indeed in a hurry, leaving behind instruments without even taking them. Thinking of this, Rocky picked up the magic stone on the research station and discovered that it still contained ample mana. Keep it. These magic stones can be used personally. And take these devices too. They can be sold as antiques. Upon finding that the magic stone still held mana, Rocky took out a large cloth bag, placed the magic stone inside, and then started gathering the instruments on the research station, clearly intending to take them all. After all, these things could be turned into money. As the city lord, Rocky was well aware of how tight Thunderhawk City's finances were. The entire city couldn't even be self-sufficient, so how could there be any revenue? Therefore, he planned to take everything he could from here. This way, even if no other discoveries were made, selling these items would at least break even. You finally arrived. Just as he was busy stuffing the instruments into the cloth bag, that strange voice appeared once more. Ah! The sudden voice startled Rocky, causing him to jolt and drop an instrument to the ground, making him wince with pain. Then when he looked toward the source of the voice, he saw someone standing in the deepest part of the laboratory, really seeing ghosts. Discovering someone in the laboratory, Rocky was taken aback and even felt a bit terrified. But as he looked more closely, he realized that the figure was not a person, but a magic energy image. Heavens! There was a magic energy image here? Discovering that the figure in the lab was just an image formed by mana, Rocky instead widened his eyes, as according to what he knew, although magic energy image technology was not the latest, it was still only invented 5 or 6 decades ago. Why would such a technology appear in a research facility almost 100 years old? The answer was not hard to guess. However, when Rocky thought of it, he couldn't help but gasp. Could it be the people in this laboratory invented the magic energy image on their own? This answer made Rocky's breathing quicken. If this were true, wouldn't that mean the research in this lab was 50 to 60 years ahead of its time? No, it's impossible. Surely someone else came before me. Finding his speculation too bold, Rocky shook his head, admonishing himself not to harbor wild thoughts or high hopes. Otherwise, if he were disappointed, he might break down. At the same time, he approached the magic energy image. Standing in front of the magic energy image, he examined it closely and found that the image was that of an old man, appearing to be 80 or 90 years old, clad in a magic robe from the land era, clearly indicative of a person from that time. I've been waiting for you. As if sensing Rocky's approach, the magic energy image spoke again. My name is Wincell, the head of this research facility. This image is my last testament. At this point, Rocky finally began to understand. The facility must have some kind of sensory mechanism. Once the stone gate outside was opened, the magic energy image activated, showing him all this. But what puzzled him was, since Wincell was the head of the facility, he must have been a significant figure. Why did he leave an image here? Such an important figure should have been sent to Sky City early on. While Rocky was perplexed, the magic energy image before him, more accurately, Wincell's image, continued speaking. I don't know when you or others might find this testament, nor do I know who you are, but I assume you have already executed the Sky City plan. But please believe me, the Sky City plan is dooming everyone. Suddenly, Wincell's image became agitated and angry. Fleeing to the sky is equivalent to handing over the land to the demons, akin to surrendering. Surrendering to the demons. This plan is utterly misguided. Sky City can't possibly take everyone, and there's no opportunity to counterattack from the sky. It's complete self-destruction. Heavens! Wincel's words left Rocky utterly astounded. Why was this old man vehemently criticizing the Sky City, which saved everyone? Who was he to be so arrogant? Meanwhile, Wincel's image paused for a long time before letting out a sigh. Enough! Discussing such matters now is pointless. If you're seeing this image, it means I'm already dead, and the Sky City plan has been executed, so nothing more can be done. After a long sigh, Wincel's image continued. You might wonder why you're seeing my image here. It's simple, I didn't evacuate. When those cowards chose to flee, I chose to stay. Don't be surprised. I'm not the only one with this idea, and we didn't stay here waiting to die. We continued our research. Research. When Wincel's image spoke this word, Rocky almost stopped breathing. Wincel not only chose not to flee to the sky, but stayed in the research facility to continue his research, which meant what? It meant the research facility should contain his inventions. Moreover, it seemed, Rocky might be the first to reach this research facility. The very thought made him forget to breathe. Wincel's last words made Rocky's heart race nonstop. Could it be that this institute really holds the magic technology from the Continental era? This possibility made Rocky hold his breath, his mind unable to think of anything else, listening intently to Wincel's final words. When the cowards chose to flee, I, like many others, chose to stay and continue with my research. The image left by Wincel continued to speak, narrating an unknown history. The arrival of the demons was so sudden that people were completely unprepared, leading to the establishment of numerous research institutes and the birth of many great inventions. Sky City is such an invention, but even the greatest invention becomes a pile of scrap in the hands of cowards who only think of running away, wasting such a great invention in vain. In contrast, the flying armor project being conducted by the Winds dynasty is more practical. They wanted to create armor that allows the user to fly in the air while greatly enhancing combat power. And once developed, it will dramatically increase the user's strength. Unfortunately, this flying armor concept, although excellent, appeared too late. If it had appeared a decade earlier, perhaps we wouldn't have been so vulnerable against the demons. Hopefully, they can make this plan succeed in the future. Wincel's words left Rocky completely shocked. The so-called flying armor plan was clearly the void magic armor. As Rocky understood, the earliest concept of the void magic armor was indeed proposed at the end of the Resistance War, but by then, vast lands had already been lost, making it impossible to realize the idea. The first truly functional void magic armor was developed after people had completely migrated to the skies. Goodness, who exactly was this Wincel? He even knew about the void magic armor, and judging from his tone, even though the void magic armor was hailed as an invention second only to Sky City, in his eyes it was merely a decent idea. Isn't this a bit too arrogant? Or could it be that this Wincel was working on inventions no less significant than the void magic armor? At this point, the image left by Wincel continued speaking. The concept of flying armor is very good, and the invention of Sky City is great, but the research I'm conducting is no less significant than theirs. After this, Wincel's image proudly declared, "My ideas differ from theirs. They are merely attempting to develop new technology to defeat the demons. But these people have forgotten one thing. There isn't the time or resources for that. The demons have already occupied vast lands. The time left for us is short, and the resources we have are dwindling. How easy is it to invent new equipment to resist the demons under these conditions? Even if they succeed, facing land completely occupied, what can just one new weapon or armor achieve? So, these people's ideas are wrong. What we should really do is enhance the existing equipment. And that is the purpose of my research." Here comes a key point. When Wincel's image finished this sentence, it paused for a moment before speaking again. "Mana runes, this is my invention. The great invention that I devoted my life's energy to. Even Sky City pales in comparison." As he spoke, Wencel's image waved its hand, revealing a symbol that Rocky couldn't understand. This is the mana rune, an energy-containing magic symbol, functioning like a magic stone, providing magical energy, and can completely replace the magic stone from now on. So, it's just this thing? When Wencel's image, with an immensely proud tone, revealed his invention, Rocky felt a bit disappointed. Because Wencel had made it clear that his invention of the mana rune was merely a substitute for the magic stone. In a world dependent on magic technology, mana has become an irreplaceable resource. Everything from Sky City to Void magic armor relies on mana to function properly. And the container that stores mana is the magic stone. Remember the drive crystal in Thunderhawk City? That huge crystal is essentially an oversized magic stone. And even the Void magic armor Rocky was wearing had magic stones embedded in it to provide the necessary mana for the armor. What Wencel invented was a substitute for the magic stone. But, so what? Today's technology has already solved the issue of recharging magic stones, making them a renewable resource. As a result, they've become less precious than they once were. So in this context, what use is the mana rune? Replace the magic stone? But the magic stone doesn't need to be replaced at all. Wencel indeed left his invention, and perhaps 100 years ago it would have had some use, but 100 years later today, it serves no purpose. This result inevitably left Rocky feeling disappointed. Oh well, it's still an invention. Maybe it can be utilized, so it's not a loss. With a long sigh, Rocky had to console himself to adjust his mood. He had always hoped to make a truly significant discovery this time, hoping to turn the tide for Thunderhawk City, but he also knew that one shouldn't be too greedy, and he didn't have that much luck. And at this moment, Wencel's voice continued. The methods for drawing mana runes and my research materials are all here. Also, there are some experimental items I used during my research here. These things can help you better understand the mana rune. When Wencel finished speaking, the image he left behind began to blur, seemingly about to disappear. Make good use of this great invention. Drive the demons out of the land. After saying this final sentence, Wencel's image vanished completely. But just at the moment the image disappeared, a wall behind it slowly opened, revealing a hidden chamber. Seeing the hidden chamber slowly open before him, Rocky immediately walked over. Even though the invention of the mana rune may not be highly practical today, it's still an invention after all. If utilized well, it could certainly yield considerable profits. So though Rocky was disappointed, he wasted no time in entering the chamber. The hidden chamber behind the wall wasn't very large, with just a table and a few large boxes inside. Walking in, Rocky went to the table and looked down, seeing a yellowed booklet on it, clearly inscribed with several words, Mana Rune Research Notes. It seems everything about the Mana Rune Wencel recorded in this notebook. Rocky carefully tucked the notebook away and then turned his attention to the boxes in the chamber. The boxes were covered in dust, looking like treasure chests sealed for many years. Just now, Wencel mentioned that they contained experimental items. I wonder if there are any treasures. Seeing these boxes, Rocky became excited once more. Although Wencel's invention might be ordinary, such a master often possesses valuable items. And if there are one or two treasures in the experimental items left by Wencel, it would be worthwhile for Rocky. So he couldn't wait to pry open the nearest box. Lifting the lid, Rocky saw two long swords inside. Taking one out, his eyes lit up at once. Good stuff! Holding the sword in his hand, Rocky immediately knew this was a fine weapon. Logically speaking, this long sword should have been sealed for nearly 100 years, but it still gleamed brilliantly, with a chill exuding from its tip, looking menacing. More importantly, the hilt of this long sword was inlaid with two magic stones. This was a piece of mana equipment. By embedding magic stones into equipment through special techniques, one could create mana equipment. Although their power couldn't rival the Void magic armor, they surpassed ordinary weapons. And given their far lower cost compared to the Void magic armor, mana equipment was highly popular. This long sword was a mana sword, and it was inlaid with two magic stones. The mana contained in these two stones undoubtedly greatly increased the sword's power and significantly raised its value. I hit the jackpot. Swinging the sword twice, Rocky was overjoyed because he knew such a piece of mana weaponry was worth quite a bit of money. If sold, it could fetch at least several hundred gold coins, almost matching Thunderhawk City's monthly fiscal revenue. Hopefully, the other things here are this valuable as well. Placing the mana sword aside reluctantly, Rocky reached for the second long sword in the box. This second sword was almost identical to the mana sword he'd just examined, except that it wasn't inlaid with magic stones. Instead, it had strange patterns imprinted on the blade. Holding the sword, Rocky examined the patterns closely and discovered that they were all composed of peculiar runes. These must be the mana runes. No wonder there's no embedded magic stone. Mana runes themselves are substitutes for magic stones. So although this sword didn't have embedded magic stones, it still belonged to the category of mana weapons due to the runes all over it, and was similarly a valuable object. However, gazing at the rune sword in his hand, and then at the mana sword on the table, Rocky suddenly had a curious thought. Which of these two swords, one with magic stones and one with magic patterns, was more powerful? With this thought, he couldn't help but be curious, and became eager to find out. Let's see which of you is sharper. Driven by curiosity, Rocky held the rune sword in his left hand and the mana sword in his right, activating the mana contained in both swords simultaneously with his magical power. In an instant, the two swords radiated light, and he swung both hands, letting the swords collide. Yet afterward, Rocky didn't hear the expected sound of collision. He just felt a swipe as his hands crossed paths, then looked at the swords in his grasp and discovered that the right-hand magic sword had been sliced in half. The magic sword in his hand was broken into two. This can't be. Seeing the magic sword split in two, Rocky was stunned. Looking at the mana sword broken into two pieces in his hand, Rocky was dumbfounded. What had he just done? To destroy such a precious weapon, it was simply too wasteful. No, that's not the point. The point was why a mana sword embedded with two magic stones could be so easily broken. Such a result made Rocky almost unable to believe his eyes, because even something as strong as the void magic armor could not so easily destroy a mana weapon. Could it be? Could it be? Thinking of this, he suddenly looked at his left hand. No, he should look at the rune sword in his left hand. Could the overwhelming power of this rune sword have easily sliced the magic sword in two? Realizing this, he couldn't help but gasp and felt a bit dazed. Because this was something that shouldn't happen at all. Previously, Wincel had already said that the mana rune was merely a substitute for a magic stone, and apart from the difference that one was a rune and the other was a stone, there was no essential difference between them. So the mana sword just now shouldn't have been cut by the rune sword. This result left Rocky completely baffled. Unable to figure it out, he then brought the broken mana sword to his eyes and examined it, finding nothing unusual. Then he closely inspected the rune sword, noticing no difference except for the rune patterns on the blade. Wait! Looking carefully at the runes on the rune sword, Rocky suddenly thought of something. These two swords did have a difference. While the mana sword only had two magic stones embedded in it, the rune sword was densely covered with runes. This discovery immediately led him to a critical question. Could it be? Could it be that because the number of runes far exceeded that of the magic stones, the power of the rune sword was vastly superior to that of the mana sword? This thought had barely emerged before Rocky took a sharp intake of breath. He suddenly felt as if his train of thought had been opened by a great door. Indeed, that must be the reason the rune sword easily cut the mana sword in two. It was because there was a vast difference in the mana contained within them. Even though the mana sword had two magic stones embedded, it simply had two. On the other hand, the runes on the rune sword formed a complete pattern. This meant that even though both were mana weapons with no qualitative difference, there was a massive quantitative gap, which should be the root cause of the mana sword being easily broken. And if this were really true, it would be terrifying, because it might indicate that the mana rune was indeed, as Wincel himself claimed, a remarkable invention on par with Sky City and the void magic armor. The reason for saying so was that Rocky quickly thought of the void magic armor he was wearing. As everyone knows, the void magic armor was powered by mana, which comes from where? Naturally, the magic stones embedded within the armor. However, just like the broken magic sword, the essential nature of magic stones as stones leads to many limitations in embedding them, and these material limitations also indirectly limit the power of the magic armor. But if the magic stones embedded in the void magic armor were replaced with more miniature, more convenient mana runes, then wouldn't the limitations be overcome? Would the same set of void magic armor, with more mana, be more powerful than before? Might there even be greater developmental space when the void magic armor breaches the limits of mana? A series of ideas popped up in Rocky's mind, making him instantly understand the true purpose of the magic runes and finally comprehend why Wincell dedicated his life to studying this invention. Because clearly, this invention was truly great. I've struck it rich, this time I've really struck it rich. Having figured out the true purpose of the mana runes, Rocky felt his heart was about to jump out. For this time, he really had struck it rich. Although now he knew very little about the mana runes and had no idea how to draw them. Do not forget that the research notes left by Wincell were already in his possession. As long as he learned everything in the notes when he returned home, he could fully grasp this great invention. So this time, he really hit the jackpot and hit it big. Excellent. Punching the air vigorously with his fist, Rocky was elated. He knew that as long as he had some time to fully master the mana rune technology, both he and Thunderhawk City would be utterly transformed by it. Calm down. I'm a city lord. Don't act like you've never seen the world. After a moment of excitement, Rocky forcibly calmed himself, then looked at the other boxes in the secret chamber and quickly opened them one by one, finding various weapons and armors inside. By this time, he already understood why Wincell had left these behind in the secret chamber. They were meant for him to use as references while learning mana runes. What a considerate old man. Taking out the equipment inscribed with mana runes from the boxes, Rocky placed them in his cloth sack, and then, carrying the sack on his shoulder, went back to the laboratory, taking everything from there as well. It wasn't that Rocky was greedy, but that he was too poor right now. Not only he but Thunderhawk City was also too poor, so this had to be done. Although the technology of mana runes was great and now in his hands, do not forget that just learning how to draw the mana runes would take quite some time, and when it would start generating real revenue was even more uncertain. Thus, while Rocky's future was hopeful, he was still a destitute city lord at the moment, and that was the harsh reality. Under such circumstances, he couldn't let anything in the lab go to waste. If they could help him learn mana runes, they'd be kept. If not, they'd all be sold. In short, nothing should be left here to go to waste. So after this, he threw aside any concerns about his city lord image and began a frantic looting in the lab. There shouldn't be anything left to take. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Rocky finally stopped, showing a very satisfied expression. After the previous looting, he had taken everything he could from the laboratory, and after ensuring there was nothing else to take, he carried the cloth sack in one hand and several tied boxes in the other, leaving the lab with his booty. Exiting the laboratory door, through the long tunnel, and finally waiting for the stone gate to reopen, he finally returned to the forest on the surface. Naturally, being back in the forest, Rocky's mood was excellent, as the gains this time were tremendous. Is there something missing? But even though Rocky was in good spirits, he vaguely felt something was amiss, as if something were missing. Could it be something I didn't take? No. I checked several times. Ire. Frowning as he thought for a moment, he suddenly remembered what was missing. It was Ire, whom he had left outside, and who was now nowhere to be found. Did this guy run off on his own? Realizing Ire had disappeared, Rocky looked around and confirmed that Ire had indeed run off. However, Rocky didn't bother to search too carefully, as he had already planned to banish Ire to the land, and in such a case, it didn't matter if Ire ran off. There was no need to bother with him anymore. Thus, he ignored the fleeing Ire and began to slowly rise into the air, preparing to leave the forest. But just at that moment, as he was just lifting off the ground, there was suddenly noise from within the forest. Help! 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 The sudden cries for help made Rocky turn his head immediately, and he saw someone limping towards him from deeper within the forest. Ire! The person running towards him was none other than Ire. As Rocky saw Ire also spotted him and immediately shouted, "Sir, help me! Help me! It's—" Ire's words were cut off abruptly when a large hand suddenly reached out from the shadows behind him, grabbed him, and in the next instant dragged him into the forest. All of this happened so suddenly that not only did Rocky fail to react, but even Ire himself did not respond, not even letting out a cry. But after a moment had passed, Rocky, realizing what had happened, shouted "not good" in his heart, immediately flying swiftly into the air. Demons! The thing that had just seized Ire must be demons. Damn, we've run into demons. Seeing Ire being dragged into the forest by a huge hand, Rocky knew that the owner of that hand must be a demon. This left him no choice but to not even consider staying to inspect closely. He immediately took to the skies and flew towards the edge of the forest. Rocky was now completely different from when he had arrived. He had come to this part of the forest empty-handed, but now he possessed the hugely important discovery of the mana rune. He did not want to engage with a demon under these circumstances. Rocky had just seen a glimmer of hope for the future. He couldn't just die cluelessly at the hands of a demon. Moreover, he was currently holding a large cloth bag in his left hand and a box on his right shoulder. How could he fight? But fortunately, he was wearing the void magic armor, and the greatest advantage of the armor was its ability to fly. As long as he could fly, he was relatively safe, so Rocky immediately took to the air. However, just as he had risen into the air, a furious roar suddenly emanated from the forest below. Roar, roar, roar! Roar, roar, roar! The sudden roar was like a thunderclap, making Rocky's head buzz and even causing him to experience ringing in his ears. What is that? Could this be a demon? Turning his head to look down at the forest, Rocky was utterly shocked. Just one roar had given him a splitting headache. It was unimaginable to Rocky how such a terrifying scream could come from any creature. How powerful must a monster be to emit such a dreadful sound? Is this the strength of a demon? Rocky had never actually seen a demon, so his understanding of demons was still limited to what he'd read in books. This made him suddenly remember Lilia's words. That is, a demon's terror was far beyond imagination, and one must never be careless, even when wearing the void magic armor. Now, it seemed he knew too little about demons, and, although he had been mentally prepared, this preparation was clearly insufficient. He must leave immediately, right now. If demons were truly this powerful, Rocky knew he couldn't linger in this forest. Even wearing the void magic armor might not save his life. Thus, he didn't hesitate to increase the speed of his void magic armor and quickly flew towards the perimeter of the forest. Once he reached where the skyship was stationed, he could return to Thunderhawk City. However, to Rocky's surprise, as he rapidly escaped through the air, another roar boomed from the forest below, followed by a large swath of trees continuously falling over. Is it catching up? As he flew at high speed towards the outer edge of the forest, Rocky looked down at his feet. He soon saw that the trees below were continuously toppling. Although he was too high to see clearly, he could still make out a massive figure chasing after him. This figure was immensely huge, roaring furiously and charging wildly, causing the trees in its path to fall like wheat. Without a doubt, this massive figure was a demon, and not only was it chasing Rocky, but its speed was also no slower than his. Damn! Realizing that the demon below was chasing him, and that its speed was no slower than his, Rocky became frantic, because this development meant that even if he successfully escaped the forest and met up with Lilia, the demon would still catch up. At that time, he could rely on the void magic armor to hide in the air, but what about Lilia and the others? Facing such a terrifying demon, the 5 skyships might be destroyed before they could even take off. I must shake off this monster. With this thought, he gritted his teeth and directly increased the speed of the void magic armor to the maximum. In an instant, the speed of the void magic armor's flight in the air sharply increased, finally creating some distance from the demon chasing through the forest. But just then, the demon in the forest roared angrily again, and a large tree suddenly flew up into the air like a javelin. Damn! While flying at high speed, Rocky only felt a gust of wind from behind. Turning around, he saw the large tree flying towards him and quickly rolled to the side in the air, barely dodging it. That was close. Watching the thrown tree fly past him, Rocky felt a chill, realizing he had narrowly escaped being hit. Yet, no sooner had he breathed a sigh of relief than more trees from the forest below soared into the air, one after another, like javelins aiming directly at him. It turned out that after Rocky accelerated, the demon below did not give up. This fearsome creature not only continued the chase, but also tried to knock him down from the sky. In such a situation, Rocky did not even have a moment to breathe. Dodging another tree, he immediately flew towards the edge of the forest without looking back. Fortunately, he was flying in the air at full speed, so even though the demon relentlessly pursued him and kept throwing javelins at him, he gradually managed to increase the distance between them. Seeing the demon getting farther and farther away, Rocky finally allowed himself to relax. Although he never saw the true face of the demon, he fully understood how terrifying this creature was. However, just when he thought he had escaped the danger, something unexpected happened. Without any warning, his speed, which had been very fast, suddenly slowed down. Not good. Sensing a steep drop in the speed of the armor, Rocky was stunned for a moment, then cursed silently, realizing he had overlooked a critical problem. The mana of the void magic armor was almost depleted. To shake off the demon, he had maintained the fastest possible speed of the void magic armor, which had helped him distance himself from the demon. However, this high-speed flying had also accelerated the consumption of mana, and just a short time later, the armor's mana was critically low, nearly out of energy. It was totally unexpected that the void magic armor would run out of mana. Rocky suddenly realized he might really be doomed. He was still far from the edge of the forest, and even if he managed to fly out of the forest at a slow pace, Lilia and the guards would have no chance against the demon relentlessly chasing him. In an instant, Rocky felt utterly despairing. He suddenly remembered something Lilia had once told him. Relying too much on the void magic armor could get you killed. At this moment, Rocky finally understood what Lilia meant. He knew far too little about the void magic armor, not even knowing how to manage its mana, which led to this embarrassing and fundamental mistake. At the same time, Rocky felt a deep malice from this world, because the mana rune he had discovered was precisely an invention that could break through the limitations of the magic stone, increasing the capacity of mana. Yet here he was about to die due to a lack of mana in the void magic armor, which felt like a cruel joke and made Rocky all the more unwilling to accept it. He had just acquired this great invention of the mana rune, had just started adapting to this new world, and had just improved his relationship with Lilia. Why was he so unlucky? However, just when he was overwhelmed with frustration, a cannon sound suddenly came from afar, followed by a burst of explosions lighting up the forest below. What is? Watching the shells burst into flames in the forest, Rocky quickly looked into the distance, then saw a scene that moved him to tears. 5 skyships were slowly approaching him in the air, relentlessly bombarding the forest below. Lilia! Seeing Lilia standing on the bow of one of the skyships, Rocky truly felt moved to tears, grateful for the girl's timely arrival. Upon seeing that Lilia had dispatched 5 skyships to pick him up, a disheartened Rocky no longer dared to delay and immediately flew towards the skyship. At the same time, Lilia, at the bow of the ship, also breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing him, her previous tension finally easing. What Rocky hadn't noticed was that he had stayed in the Institute much longer than he had imagined, and Lilia, who had been waiting on the outskirts of the forest, was already frantic with worry. To others, Rocky in his void magic armor might seem invincible, and Rocky himself thought the same, but only Lilia knew this wasn't the case. Although the void magic armor was strong, it wasn't invincible, especially for a novice like Rocky, so her worry for his safety was inevitable. Fortunately, Lilia's battle experience was incredibly vast. When the first roar of the demons echoed from the forest, she instantly realized Rocky might be in danger. This feeling, though baseless, was a unique intuition held by those who had experienced warfare, prompting her to immediately order the skyships to take to the air and meet Rocky above. As it happened, not long after the skyships ascended, Lilia saw Rocky in the air, flying unusually slowly, and more crucially, she spotted the demons relentlessly pursuing him through the forest. This quickly made Lilia grasp the peril Rocky was in, so she had the skyships close in while ordering a bombardment on the demons in the forest. Although the skyships of Thunderhawk City were all reconnaissance ships with weak combat capabilities, the magic cannons at the bow and stern still proved somewhat useful when bombarding land targets. Besides, Lilia wasn't aiming to kill the demons, just to provide Rocky with an opening in case he fell at that moment, which led to the sequence of events that followed. Shortly thereafter, Rocky finally arrived above the skyship where Lilia was located, but before he could land safely, he crashed onto the deck. His void magic armor's mana was completely depleted just then. It was a close call, a very close call indeed. Had he been any later, he would have fallen in the forest and been devoured by demons. Roar, roar, roar. Roar, roar, roars. As if noticing Rocky's safe boarding, an angry roar suddenly bellowed from the forest being bombarded by the magic cannons. This roar was not only deafening, but also carried a deep frustration, a fury about prey that was on the verge of being caught, yet escaped at the last moment. Such a terrifying outcry immediately terrified the guards on the skyship, particularly the gunners responsible for the cannons, who even forgot to continue firing. Even the well-versed Lilia frowned at that moment. However, Rocky's reaction at this time was completely different from theirs. Having crashed onto the deck, he flipped over and stood up, his expression not showing the slightest fear, but instead bursting into loud laughter. This caused both the demon's roars and his laughter to simultaneously echo through the skies and the land. Seeing Rocky's reaction, all the guards looked on in disbelief. Faced with such a terrifying demon, this city lord was not only able to laugh, but did so with such excitement. It was utterly incredible. The guards on the ship were once again stunned by Rocky, not because of his void magic armor this time, but by the bravery and madness he exhibited in that moment. Indeed, in these guards' eyes, laughing in the face of such a terrifying demon was surely an act of bravery, or perhaps even madness. But they thought too much. Rocky's laughter was simply the result of the joy from having narrowly escaped death. Nothing more. It wasn't his fault, considering the circumstances were too perilous not a moment ago. Had Lilia not arrived in time, he truly might have died in that forest. So how could Rocky not laugh joyously? When he stopped laughing, he went straight to Lilia and gave her a big, tight hug. "You!" The sudden hug took Lilia by surprise, turning her little face into a red apple in an instant. "Thank goodness you were here, otherwise I would have died out there." Holding her tightly, Rocky sincerely said, considering Lilia's arrival to be incredibly timely. "You don't need to do this, it's what I should do." After a moment, the blushing Lilia finally responded, but the usually assertive woman stuttered at this time. "There's nothing that should. If it's good, it's good." Having finally let go of Lilia, Rocky laughed heartily and then turned to the guards on the deck, saying, "Stop the bombing. Let all the skyships ascend and head back immediately." "Yes." Upon receiving the order, the guards immediately relayed Rocky's command, and soon the 5 skyships stopped bombing the forest and began to slowly ascend, preparing to return. Only when the skyship gradually climbed into the high sky did Rocky say to Lilia, "Have someone move these items into the cabin, and don't let others touch them. These are..." Actually, when Rocky crashed onto the deck, Lilia had already noticed the large cloth bag and several boxes he brought back, but she hadn't had the chance to ask about them until now. And since Rocky had brought it up, she looked at these items and asked with anticipation, "Our good days are coming." The response might be unintelligible to outsiders, but Lilia knew exactly what it meant. Thus, her eyes immediately lit up, followed by no further questions as she took the cloth bag in one hand and lifted the case with the other, personally delivering these items into the cabin where she stayed and guarded them herself. It was only after watching Lilia enter the cabin that Rocky could finally relax. Then, just as before, he stayed alone on the deck. He wasn't trying to act cool. He was planning for his and Thunderhawk City's future. Discovering the mana rune would undoubtedly completely change his life and equally transform Thunderhawk City, perhaps even the entire world. However, how to utilize the mana rune and the specifics of its operation were problems Rocky couldn't ignore. Such a monumental invention, if handled well, could drastically elevate someone's status. Yet if mismanaged, it could lead to utter ruin, since the innocent bearing a treasure invites trouble. Rocky was well aware of this. He certainly did not want the mana rune he painstakingly found to end up benefiting someone else, or worse, be the death of him. Such a scenario was absolutely unacceptable. Therefore, after returning to Thunderhawk City, Rocky had to carefully consider his next steps. Unfortunately, he had not thought for long before he found staying on the deck unbearable. As the skyship ascended higher, the winds on the deck grew stronger. Yet without mana, the void magic armor could no longer provide protection, so he had no choice but to return to the cabin. Back in the cabin, Rocky found Lilia in his room, guarding the place. By the way, where are the other 6 people? Upon seeing Lilia, Rocky suddenly remembered and casually asked. Previously, apart from bringing Ire, Rocky had also brought Ire's 6 confidants. However, he hadn't seen them on the ship just now. I left them on land due to the emergency when I went to pick you up. After stealing a glance at Rocky, Lilia gave a reply, and Rocky, in response, gave her a thumbs up. This was actually Rocky's original intention as well. He had no intention of letting Ire or his subordinates off the hook, but felt that killing them would be too severe a punishment. It's not that he was soft-hearted. Rather, he believed that the act of killing should be reserved as a last resort and the most severe punishment, to retain its deterrent power. Hence, he had planned to leave Ire and the others on land from the start. Lilia clearly saw through his intentions, thus not bringing them aboard. Afterwards, the skyship ascended continuously until it grew darker, and they finally returned to Thunderhawk City. Upon successfully returning to Thunderhawk City, Rocky sent the guards back to the guard corps, and then went with Lilia, along with their numerous gains, to the city lord's mansion. However, instead of rushing to research the mana rune, he took a good night's sleep. After all, Rocky's identity was the city lord, and with Thunderhawk City undergoing major changes, with troublemakers like Ire and Parolo eliminated, he had fewer troubles to deal with. However, he also faced many new challenges, such as new personnel appointments. Combining the issues of the mana rune and future developments, these were matters he needed to consider and would not be resolved overnight. Thus, after returning to the city lord's mansion, he decided to rest well first, to clear his mind and make decisions for the future. While Rocky, content with his vast gains, dozed off upon returning to Thunderhawk City, some people in the city were far from sleep, like Voss. Thunderhawk City had just over 1,000 residents, among whom there were few nobles, Voss being the most prominent among them. At this moment, Voss was sitting in his study, still the epitome of a nobleman, with a person sitting opposite him, a noble girl about 17 or 18 years old, very pretty with a distinct noble demeanor, and sharing some resemblance with Voss. Grandfather, did the city lord really capture Ire and Parolo? Yes. Voss, maintaining his usual faint smile, nodded as he looked at his granddaughter. What is he planning to do? Eradicate the toxic tumors. Voss's answer was simple and clear. This response, however, made the girl across from him frown, thinking for a while before speaking. But I heard this new city lord is timid and indecisive. Parolo is one thing, but how could he dare move against Captain Ire? That's not important. What matters is that he has already made his move. Then, will he come after us? The girl's words made Voss pause. Then he smiled and shook his head. Eileen, do you also see your grandfather as a toxic tumor? His words startled Eileen, but she quickly flashed a cunning smile. Grandfather, that's not important. What's important is how the city lord sees you. This reply made Voss laugh even more heartily, and he was very pleased. You were quite right. Eileen's response satisfied Voss, and he nodded with a smile. But then he added, however, you needn't worry. The city lord won't move against us. I know. Aileen shrugged indifferently and glanced at Voss. Grandfather has a significant influence on the import of yarn, so as long as the city lord isn't a fool, he won't touch us. No, that's not the reason. This time, Voss shook his head, indicating that his granddaughter didn't grasp the key point of the matter. Aileen was surprised, puzzled as she looked at Voss, unsure where her thoughts had gone astray. However, Voss quickly explained, merchants are always after profit, so even if we're not around, as long as the city lord can bring out the money, he can find a new chamber of commerce to import yarn. Thus, that isn't our true safeguard. Then what is our safeguard? It depends on what we can offer the city lord. After a pause, Voss provided the answer. Thunderhawk City is too small. So small that only we can help him. That's why he won't move against us. I doubt it. Aileen pouted at Voss' explanation. Grandfather, our city lord doesn't seem like he has great ambitions. Otherwise, he wouldn't have ended up in this situation. So he might not need us. That's not important. Voss smiled slightly at that moment, then looked at his granddaughter. Aileen, whether the city lord has grand ambitions isn't for us to consider. I just want you to understand one thing. Only by figuring out our value can we survive. After saying this, Voss handed Aileen a letter. This letter, deliver it to the city lord for me tomorrow. Looking at the envelope, Aileen immediately revealed a surprised expression and immediately looked towards Voss. Grandfather, why are you doing this? Early the next morning, Rocky rose early. Last night was the soundest sleep he had since his arrival, not even dreaming until daylight. Upon waking, he felt refreshed, with all fatigue gone. However, his early rise was not idle. As the city lord, he had many matters to attend to, such as appointing the new captain of the guards and the new administrative officer. As for these matters, Rocky had already made plans yesterday. He intended for Lilia to temporarily also take on the role of captain of the Guard Corps. The Guard Corps was Thunderhawk City's only armed force and absolutely couldn't be left unmanaged. In the face of severe staffing shortages, Lilia had to take on the role, and for someone with enough authority and strength like Lilia, it wasn't difficult. As for the new administrative officer, Rocky decided to act as one himself for now. After all, Thunderhawk City was very small, and the administrative officer was essentially a nominal position, one he could manage. This arrangement was naturally out of necessity, as Rocky had no one else available besides Lilia. Hence, he could only choose this stopgap measure and consider gradually cultivating his own team later. Just after he finished breakfast and was about to inform Lilia of his decision, Lilia was the one who notified him first, saying that Aileen had arrived. Aileen? Who is she? Rocky found the name unfamiliar, not knowing who she was. She is Voss' granddaughter. Voss' granddaughter? This answer greatly surprised Rocky. Was Voss seeking him? But even if Voss had matters, shouldn't he come himself? What's with sending his granddaughter? Let's go, let's see her. Regarding the cunning Voss, Rocky always found him hard to read, so he simply stopped thinking about it and directly brought Lilia to the City Lord's Hall. Soon, he met Aileen, who had been waiting in the City Lord's Hall. City Lord, this is a letter from my grandfather. After a brief self-introduction, Aileen got straight to the point, handing over the letter her grandfather had instructed her to deliver last night to Rocky. Receiving the envelope from Aileen, Rocky looked at her, then at the envelope in his hand, his mind full of questions. But when he opened the envelope and read its contents, he frowned deeply. Holding the letter, Rocky pondered for a long time before turning his gaze back to Aileen and asking, Lord Voss is ill? Yes, my grandfather felt unwell yesterday and is bedridden. So, he wants you to replace the financial officer? No, my grandfather merely suggested it. Everything still needs the city lord's arrangement. Aileen, who resembled Voss slightly in appearance, also shared a similar manner and tone to Voss, maintaining a calm and composed demeanor in front of Rocky, speaking impeccably. But her words plunged Rocky into deep thought. The letter Voss handed to him was, in fact, a leave of absence, roughly stating that his health was not in good shape and he needed some time to recuperate. Of course, that was nonsense. He was perfectly fine yesterday. How could he not go to work today after just one night? Rocky wouldn't believe it at all. The truly significant content of the letter was only one thing. Voss recommended his granddaughter to act as the financial officer. What was this old fox planning? Glancing at the girl named Aileen, Rocky couldn't grasp Voss' intentions. Why suddenly push his granddaughter forward? At the same time, he felt helpless, as Voss was clearly planning to have Aileen replace him. All Rocky could do was agree or disagree. But in truth, he didn't really have a choice. If he didn't accept Voss' suggestion and didn't let Aileen take over as finance officer, then who would? He couldn't even find someone to take over the nominal role of the administrative officer, let alone the vital and irreplaceable position of the finance officer. So, although it seemed irregular, after frowning in thought for a while, Rocky nodded at Aileen and said, "Aileen, Thunderhawk City's finances will be entrusted to you. I hope you won't let down Lord Voss' recommendation." "Thank you, City Lord. Please quickly summarize the city's financial status and provide the financial income for the last 3 quarters to me." "Yes." While agreeing to make Aileen the new finance officer, Rocky also assigned her a task, which was to compile a summary of Thunderhawk City's finances for him. After agreeing, Aileen bowed deeply to Rocky and then turned to leave. It wasn't until she left that Lilia looked at Rocky. "Rocky, what does Voss intend to do?" "Who knows?" Shaking his head, Rocky couldn't understand Voss' intentions. However, he thought Voss' actions were beneficial because with this, Thunderhawk City's original base would be gone entirely, and Rocky's control over the city would further strengthen, rendering it undoubtedly a good thing. Therefore, he didn't dwell on this matter too much, but instead turned to Lilia. "Lilia, I would like you to temporarily command the Guard Corps, but only temporarily. I will make other appointments once I find suitable personnel." "No problem." Lilia did not refuse this request. She knew the importance of the Guard Corps, and she indeed ought to help Rocky control such a force, ensuring it didn't fall into the hands of outsiders. With this resolved, the rest became considerably smooth. Lilia took charge of the Guard Corps, while Rocky gathered those under Parolo's command into the City Lord's Hall, meeting with them and arranging for a detailed report on Thunderhawk City, including its population, industries, and resources to be provided to him. As the City Lord, Rocky needed a comprehensive understanding of his city. Once everything was arranged, his workload finally came to an end. However, instead of resting after having some free time, Rocky returned to his room, where he took out Wencel's research notebook. This notebook contained detailed records on mana runes, constituting a great wealth. Rocky's task was to learn everything in the notebook and fully master mana runes. "Let's begin." Holding the notebook, he took a deep breath and then slowly opened it, studying its content. Through reading, Rocky became so engrossed that by the time he stopped, it was already late at night. Incredible! Closing the notebook slowly, Rocky attempted to calm himself, yet found it impossible. The content he had seen in the research notebook was simply too astounding. Wencel's research notes contained detailed records of various aspects regarding mana runes, from initial research ideas, through the research process, to the methods of drawing the runes, and finally the usage of the runes. Everything was documented within. It was only after reading these notes that Rocky truly understood mana runes. Indeed, it was a great invention. As for Wencel, he was truly a genius. Not only did Wencel invent mana runes, but he also single-handedly perfected the entire system of mana runes, even creating a classification system for the runes. According to his classification, mana runes had 6 levels, with the first level being the lowest and the 6th the highest. As the level increased, the rune's capacity also increased. This classification coincidentally corresponded to the size of magic stones, which were also divided into 6 levels: micro, small, medium, large, super large, and special. According to Wencel's calculations, a first-level rune corresponded to a micro-magic stone, but the mana contained within was only half that of a micro-magic stone. In other words, 2 first-level runes were equivalent to 1 micro-magic stone. A second-level rune corresponded to a small magic stone, but similarly, 3 second-level runes were equivalent to 1 small magic stone. Similarly, The third level, fourth level, and fifth level runes followed similar conversion methods. From this conversion, it could be seen that a single rune could not compare in capacity with a magic stone of the same level. Wenzel also mentioned this in his notes. However, he also emphasized that the advantage of mana runes was not in their capacity, but in their size. The essence of a magic stone was, after all, a stone. This essence meant that magic stones inherently suffered from a significant drawback, which was their large size. Even the smallest micro-magic stone was the size of a bottle cap. This was the smallest size a magic stone could achieve. Any smaller, and it would be unable to hold any mana, turning into a useless stone. But what could a micro-magic stone do? Sorry, it could only be used for everyday life, such as providing energy for a magic energy lamp. It couldn't do anything else, as the mana contained in a micro-magic stone was too little. It couldn't be used to create magic energy equipment, much less be embedded in void magic armor. To make magic energy equipment, at least small magic stones were needed, but how big were they? About the size of an egg. Each small magic stone was equivalent to an egg-sized stone. So, imagine a piece of equipment, even something large like a shield or plate armor. How many small magic stones could be embedded in it? As for medium and large magic stones, it was even worse. They were far too large to be used for making equipment. According to Rocky's knowledge, only a set of void magic armor could barely embed a medium magic stone. There was no other equipment that could embed such a large stone. So, even though medium and larger magic stones contained a lot of mana, their large size meant they could only be used in magic cannons or skyships. This was the innate disadvantage of magic stones. They were too big, and the advantage of mana runes lay precisely here. What was a rune? It was a symbol. How big was a rune? A rune had no size. As long as there was space on the target, the rune could be drawn on it, and there was no limit to how many could be drawn. In using mana runes, one could say there was practically no limitation. This was why Rocky was able to cut through a mana sword with a rune sword. Although the mana sword contained embedded small magic stones, their large size meant only 2 small magic stones were embedded in the sword's hilt, naturally limiting its power within a certain range. On the other hand, Wenzel's rune sword had no such limitation. Wenzel specifically mentioned this rune sword in his notes, emphasizing that all the runes drawn on it were first-level runes. One had to realize that the mana of 2 first-level runes was only equivalent to 1 micro-magic stone, while the mana sword had small magic stones, and 2 of them at that. Yet, even so, once the number of first-level runes with such low mana content reached a certain amount, the power they unleashed directly surpassed that of 2 small magic stones. This was exactly the original intention behind Wenzel's research on mana runes, to use quantitative changes to trigger qualitative changes. Phew! As Rocky closed the research notes and organized the ideas he had seen, he couldn't help but take a deep breath. By reading the content in the notebook, he finally understood the greatness and subtlety of mana runes, and he grew respectful towards Wenzel. Wenzel was unquestionably a master. This was not only reflected in his abilities, but also in his resolve to resist demons. This determination even led him to give up the chance to flee to Sky City. One must know that, given his master-level status, he would surely have been among the first groups sent to the skies back then. Yet Wenzel did not leave. It was precisely this stubbornness that led him to invent mana runes. Wenzel recorded in detail in his notes that it was after everyone else had fled to the skies that he continued researching alone in the laboratory for 10 years, eventually succeeding in studying mana runes. It was a full 10 years. What kind of perseverance did it take for Wenzel to persist for such a long time and ultimately complete his great invention? Such perseverance filled Rocky with admiration. Now that mana runes were finally seeing the light of day again and were in Rocky's hands, it was not only for himself, but even for Wenzel that Rocky needed to revitalize mana runes. Regarding the technology of drawing runes, Wenzel also recorded it in great detail in his notes. To draw mana runes, magic power was necessary, and the higher the level of the rune, the higher the magic power requirement. According to the notes, a first-level magic energy rune was simple. A first-level mage, once they learned the method, could complete it. However, when the rune level reached the second level, the magic power requirement was much higher, requiring at least a third-level mage to complete it. For the larger capacity third-level rune, at least a sixth-level mage was needed to draw it successfully. The stringent requirements on magic power did trouble Rocky somewhat, because he was only a first-level mage. But luckily, this was not an absolute issue. Although he was just a first-level mage now, he could level up in the future. Even if his level couldn't reach the highest, he could still hire people to draw runes. So, though this made him a bit troubled, it was not terribly worrying. Besides, he could start learning the first-level runes, which was enough for now. He needed to quickly learn first-level runes. After finishing the research notes, Rocky had a clear goal for what he needed to do next. Learn the first-level mana runes as quickly as possible. By the next day, Rocky had someone prepare a room in the city lord's mansion early in the morning to serve as his own study. Since he had the ability to draw first-level magic energy runes, he naturally planned to devote his time to learning how to make them. However, it was best to have a separate study for these kinds of activities. Fortunately, the city lord's mansion had numerous rooms available, and it was just a matter of arranging one to be cleared out. Later on, the equipment scavenged from the research institute could be moved in, and the study would be complete. But what Rocky hadn't anticipated was that Aileen, whom he had met the day before, arrived even before the room had been readied. "Is it ready already?" With a stack of thick papers in hand, Rocky found it hard to believe, because this stack contained the financial summaries of Thunderhawk City for the last 3 quarters. The day before, Rocky had indeed asked Aileen to prepare this information and hand it to him, but he hadn't expected her to compile so much data so quickly. It had only been 1 day. Looking at the documents in his hand, and then at Aileen standing before him, Rocky found it hard to believe. In his eyes, Aileen was just a delicate girl, approximately 17 or 18 years old, seemingly younger than him. Yet he hadn't anticipated her capability in handling matters to be so strong. It would be one thing if Voss had helped organize these documents, but if Aileen had done it alone, then this seemingly youthful girl was truly extraordinary. Thinking this, Rocky tentatively asked, "Aileen, have you looked over all the financial documents regarding Thunderhawk City?" "I have," she replied, her face devoid of much expression. "Since that's the case, do you have anything you want to tell me?" Seeing her nod, Rocky asked again. "Yes, I hope the city lord can be prepared." Facing Rocky's casual query, Aileen indeed nodded, then stated, "I just received news that the price of imported yarn next month might be much higher than before." "Oh." Rocky hadn't expected Aileen to bring up the matter of yarn, and he furrowed his brow. As mentioned before, textiles were the only industry of Thunderhawk City. Men in the city took care of farming while the women worked on weaving at home. Thus, every quarter, the city lord's mansion had to import yarn from cooperating chambers of commerce to ensure that the residents could produce fabric. Eileen's words suddenly made Rocky realize it was already August, and September was the last month of the 3rd quarter. As city lord, he indeed needed to prepare the yarn required for the 4th quarter. However, he was puzzled as to why Aileen would suddenly tell him about the rise in yarn prices. This matter couldn't be taken lightly by Rocky, as it was extremely significant, directly affecting the financial income of Thunderhawk City and the well-being of its residents. Thus, he immediately set aside his concerns about magic pattern runes and regarded Aileen solemnly. "Aileen, what exactly is going on? Is there a problem with the Azure Commerce Guild?" There were 2 chambers of commerce working with Thunderhawk City. The Azure Commerce Guild, mentioned by Rocky, was one of them, primarily responsible for supplying the city with yarn and food. The fabric produced was then sold to another chamber of commerce. Confronted with his question, Aileen directly responded, "Sir, it's not that there's a problem with the Azure Commerce Guild, but Songlong City is engaged in warfare." "Are you saying Songlong City has gone to war?" "Yes, the information is very reliable." Facing Rocky's slightly surprised look, Aileen nodded, then fixed her gaze on his face, observing his reaction closely. Despite her calm demeanor in front of the city lord, Aileen was actually quite intrigued. Previously, When Voss handed over the position of finance officer to her, Eileen always wondered what her grandfather meant by this. Of course, with her intelligence, she could understand that her grandfather wanted her to start building a relationship with the city lord from scratch, yet Eileen didn't see the reason for doing so. The city lord in front of her appeared quite ordinary, and his reputation was notably feeble. Was he really worth building a relationship with? Eileen couldn't figure it out, but she agreed to her grandfather's approach and grew curious about Rocky. Just like she had just mentioned, she did indeed receive this news today, but the reason she told Rocky was not out of loyalty, but because Eileen wanted to seize the opportunity to see how the city lord would react. Was this city lord truly as incompetent and pathetic as rumors suggested, or did he actually possess some extraordinary qualities? Of course, at this moment Rocky was unaware of what Eileen was thinking because he was considering a more critical issue. Shortly after, he sighed and then glanced at Eileen. So, does this mean there might be problems with the food supply for the winter as well? They were clearly discussing the rising prices of yarn. Yet Rocky suddenly mentioned the food supply for the winter, which was completely off topic. But it was precisely this remark that made Eileen's eyes light up. This city lord was quite impressive. Eileen stared intently at Rocky and a slight, barely noticeable smile appeared on her face. It seemed that this city lord wasn't particularly incompetent. At least he was thinking clearly. Because, indeed, the rising prices of yarn were related to the food issue in Thunderhawk City. These two matters seemed unrelated but were actually closely connected. It was well known that the textile industry was the sole industry in Thunderhawk City, and the revenue from exported textiles was the only source of income. The use of this money was even more important as it was meant for buying food. Thunderhawk City's own food production was far from enough to feed everyone, and it was necessary to purchase additional food to meet the needs of the residents. But now, as the price of yarn, a raw material, increased, the profit from exported textiles would decrease, naturally reducing the money available to buy food. Perhaps you might wonder why not just increase the price of the textiles as well? If both were raised, wouldn't it solve the problem? This idea might sound reasonable, but that's all it was. Reasonable sounding. The actual situation was nowhere near that simple. After all, the reason Thunderhawk City's textiles were able to sell was because they were cheap. In the skies, there were not just one, but multiple cities producing textiles like Sky City, compared to which Thunderhawk City's textiles were neither substantial in quantity nor quality. Their only advantage was the lower price, which attracted chambers of commerce to purchase in large quantities. But once Rocky raised the textile prices, no chamber of commerce would trade with them. In this matter, Thunderhawk City utterly lacked bargaining power. So, at the root of it all was the rising price of yarn. Regarding the price increase of yarn, Eileen had already provided a reason. Songlong City was engaged in a war. Songlong City, a large sky city with a population of over 100,000, housed the headquarters of the Azure Commerce Guild, which collaborated with Thunderhawk City. The reason the Azure Commerce Guild could sell large quantities of yarn was because Songlong City produced a lot of cotton, which enabled the guild to conduct yarn business. But now, as Songlong City was at war, this would inevitably lead to a rise in local prices, and the Azure Commerce Guild would certainly seize the opportunity to increase the price of the yarn sold to Thunderhawk City. And more importantly, Thunderhawk City not only needed to import yarn from the Azure Commerce Guild, but also the food necessary for winter. As the headquarters were located in Songlong City, a large sky city, the Azure Commerce Guild could access a large amount of food. However, with the start of military conflicts, securing more food would become challenging, and the prices offered by the Azure Commerce Guild would rise as a result. With the increase in yarn prices and the decline in textile income, not only would the money for food decrease, but the food prices might also surge significantly. Between the two, the pressure on Thunderhawk City was enormous. Therefore, Eileen had urged Rocky to be prepared, because given Thunderhawk City's current financial situation, it might be impossible to buy enough food for the winter. And if there was a food shortage, many people in the city would starve to death. If such a situation truly arose, it would be a real crisis for Thunderhawk City. And as the city lord, Rocky naturally had to be prepared to face this crisis. In fact, Aileen had initially thought that Rocky wouldn't be able to foresee such a far-reaching issue, considering the complexity and the non-obviousness of the connections. People with slow reactions or less capable minds would never think that a problem with yarn could trigger such a massive crisis. But Rocky indeed had thought of it, which was interesting. Since Rocky now understood the severity of the situation, Aileen was very curious to know how, exactly, this City Lord planned to help Thunderhawk City get through this difficult time. Yes, how exactly would Thunderhawk City overcome this difficult time? That was a question Rocky was also pondering. At this moment, Rocky felt both helpless and powerless. The discovery of mana runes should have promised him a bright future. But before he had even mastered a single rune, Thunderhawk City was faced with such a big problem. And if not handled carefully, it could lead to serious chaos. So, how exactly could Thunderhawk City overcome this difficult time? Rocky indeed was thinking hard. Sitting in the City Lord's seat, Rocky pondered for a long time. But no matter how much he thought, he couldn't come up with a suitable solution. Time was too pressing. The current time was August, and in a few months, winter would come. In such a short time, he simply couldn't raise the money. Without money, there might not be enough to pay for the grain, and then the residents of the city would suffer. What should be done? After a long while, Rocky could only sigh helplessly and then look to Aileen. Aileen, please ask Lord Voss to step in and negotiate with the Azure Commerce Guild. All right, I will convey the message to Grandfather. Nodding her head, Aileen wasn't surprised by the request, as she was the finance officer of Thunderhawk City and knew the city's financial situation better than anyone. She was well aware that Rocky could probably only think of such an ineffective method. Unfortunately, this method would not work at all. The Azure Commerce Guild might not be a dominant chamber of commerce, but it was not small in scale. A chamber of commerce of such caliber only looked at profits, not relationships. And even if relationships were to be considered, they wouldn't with Thunderhawk City. So even with her grandfather intervening, it wouldn't be very effective. This could not help but make Aileen a bit disappointed. She thought that Rocky might come up with some practical solutions. But then, Rocky spoke again. Also, can you get in touch with merchants who specialize in trading magic stones? Magic stones? Aileen furrowed her brows at Rocky's words, but nodded. I can. I will contact them as soon as possible. But are you planning to? I was lucky during my last trip to the land and found some items, among which are a few medium magic stones that could sell for a good sum. So, I plan to sell all these magic stones. This should alleviate some of the city's financial pressure. Rocky knew what Aileen wanted to ask, so he provided an answer before she could finish her question. And this answer was the only solution he could think of now. The biggest problem Thunderhawk City faced was, in fact, a single one: the lack of money. This problem could not be solved in a day or two, and for Rocky to come up with a solution right now was utterly unrealistic, but if it was just about easing the immediate urgency, he felt he could manage it. Like selling some items. Last time he visited the research facility, not only did Rocky obtain research notes on mana runes, but he also scavenged a bunch of items from the labs. Although many of them were useful to him, some could be sold, like the magic stones. In the lab, he found quite a few magic stones, all containing ample mana, among which were several medium magic stones. Medium magic stones, being too large for use in equipment, were not typically used to manufacture gear, but could provide mana for skyships and be embedded in magic cannons, making them very valuable and worth a considerable amount of money when sold. With this money, the financial pressure on Thunderhawk City could be alleviated to some extent. Under such pressing circumstances, Rocky could only rely on this method to help Thunderhawk City overcome its difficulties. After he finished speaking, Aileen across from him nodded slightly, without further questioning. However, in her heart, Aileen was somewhat surprised by his words. She really hadn't expected Rocky to be hiding so much private stash. What was even more unexpected to her was that, for the sake of the Thunderhawk City residents to survive the winter, Rocky was willing to sell off his belongings. This action did make her see him in a new light. Because as Aileen knew, not every city lord of Sky City was fond of their citizens. And in fact, the vast majority of city lords didn't care much about the lives of the residents, or they completely regarded the residents as their personal property. To get these city lords to sell their belongings for the sake of the city's citizens was fundamentally impossible. But Rocky had done it. His solution might not be very clever, but it still made Aileen look at him with newfound respect. Clearly, Rocky's actions had made a good impression on Aileen, so she decided to seriously discuss with her grandfather and see if they could get the Azure Commerce Guild to compromise on the prices of yarn and grain. By around noon, Aileen had left the city lord's mansion, and when she was gone, Rocky returned to his own room, not long after which the empty room he had ordered to be prepared was ready. After surveying the tidied room, Rocky was very satisfied and dismissed everyone. Only then did he move all the equipment he'd scavenged from the Research Institute into the room, transforming the bare room into a fully equipped laboratory with his arrangement. Once everything was in order, he took out his research notes. "Looks like I need to hurry up." Holding the research notes in his hands, he couldn't help but feel the urgency of time. The previous conversation with Aileen not only made him aware that Thunderhawk City was facing a major problem, but also made him realize that he didn't have much time. The weakness of Thunderhawk City didn't allow him any luxury of time. He had to learn mana runes as quickly as possible and make them valuable fast. Otherwise, even if he could wait, Thunderhawk City could not. Sigh. Standing in front of a desk, Rocky opened his research notes to the section on rune drafting and studied it over and over. As the most basic mana runes, first-level runes could be drafted by a first-level mage, but this was only in terms of magic power requirements. As for technical skill, even first-level runes required a high level of expertise to be successfully drafted, and it was this skill that Rocky needed to master. Of course, mastering the first-level runes couldn't be achieved simply by rote memorization of the methods in the research notes. Extensive practice was also necessary. Before long, there was a knock on the door, and then Lilia, carrying a large box, arrived in the laboratory. "This is the equipment you asked for." Lilia set the large box on the floor and came up beside Rocky, noticing he was intently studying the research notes. She didn't disturb him and silently stood by his side. After a few minutes had passed, Rocky finally took his attention away from the research notes and looked at Lilia. "Thank you for your hard work." "No problem. Have you already learned all the mana runes?" Glancing at the research notes set aside, Lilia appeared very curious. "How could it be so fast?" "I've just started learning." Seeing Lilia's curious expression and her blinking big eyes, Rocky suddenly discovered she had such an adorable side and almost couldn't resist pinching her cheek. "Oh, I'll take my leave then." Completely oblivious to how cute she had been just a moment ago, Lilia then nodded understandingly, not quite getting it, and turned to leave the room. However, just as she reached the door, she suddenly remembered something. "Rocky, what is it?" "The guard corps' equipment is so worn it can't be used anymore, and there's hardly any spare gear left. Now that we've brought you so much, it's time you considered getting new equipment for the guard corps." After saying that, Lilia then left the laboratory. But as soon as the door closed, Rocky in the lab went crazy. He hadn't resolved the issue of having no money for supplies, and now the guard corps' equipment needed replacing too. How was he supposed to survive this?
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.